I'd like to call the Board of Finance regular meeting of Wednesday, August 9th to order. Please join me in the pledge.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Okay. Next up on our agenda is delegations. Would anybody like to address the Board of Finance this evening? Seeing no one, we'll move on to the approval of minutes for the regular meeting of June 14th.
Motion to approve the minutes for the regular meeting dated June 14, 2017.
I'll second.
Is there any discussion? Hearing none, I'll call for a motion. All those in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay. Motion carries. Next, we will begin with the reports. I see Mr. Scott Bassett is here from our auditor. If you'd like to address the board this evening regarding the June 30th, 2016 audit results.
Thank you for the record. My name is Scott Bassett. I'm a partner with RSM, and we conducted the audit for the town of East Lyme for the year ended June 30th, 2016. The audit report was late this year. Which wasn't planned, but there were some delays both at the town and Board of Ed side, and when it runs into a little bit past December into January, our manpower at that point is limited, just because what we do with our clients as far as when they're scheduled to get done. So that was the main reason. I think we had some third-party information that delayed Anna bringing things together. But we still, the town still wrestles with the financial system and the cumbersome job it is to close the books. Many communities, closing the books is not quite the effort that Anna has to go through. And, and timeliness of reporting is very, very important. So it's something that I would have this board to continue to look at and to see of ways in which it may be improved. A lot of things, the town and Board of Ed being on the same system would accelerate closing the books, I think. And just not going through a process where you're recreating past work just to get to the end result through June 30th, I think is something significant. And then maybe examining the modules that you have as far as where you're not using Excel spreadsheets to create data. Basically, you're using the system and the initial inputs to keep the data current. So Anna and I have our scheduled meeting for next week where we're going to work from the deliverable backwards, because quite frankly, if we go in past January 15th, I just don't have the man hours to get in there until, let's just say, after April 15th, and then we come in and perform the audit. But from a whole, at the end of the day, when we were done with the audit, some positive results, in my opinion, as far as what we've seen throughout the state for the 2016 year. Your fund balance decreased by a little bit, but still remained at about 7.6%. And then the key item, I think, that we look at as far as long-term liabilities and things that get a lot of talk in the papers, whether at a local level or at the state level, is funding of a pension plan. And your pension plan is funded at 73%. The national average of a pension plan is a little bit less than 70%. So your plan remained very well funded. If I remember correctly, I think 4 or 5 years ago, you went from pretty much a guaranteed annuity contract that was paying something, in the neighborhood of 3 or 4% into mutual funds, and you've kind of timed the market pretty nicely. The rate of return in the 2016 year, obviously, it's a point in time, so when you measure, it was a small decrease, but if you average your rate of return, funds, I believe the town has a favorable rate of return since that that decision was made. We did have some comments, and the comments really have to do with the ability to close the book, and what that takes in order to fulfill all your reporting requirements, both at the state level and at the federal level. So it's going to take a little bit of work. I know there's a new business manager at the Board of Ed. I've worked with Mariana for many years now, and both on the town side and on the Board of Ed side. So I believe her and Anna working together, I think that's going to be certainly an asset as far as closing the books go. But that's a general overview. If you want, I'll walk you through some of the key pages of the report if you have it with you.
Yeah.
If you do that, I think that'd be terrific, where you can see some of the numbers that I think are important and to highlight for you.
Can I just ask a question about one thing you said already?
Certainly.
And I've totally forgotten your first name, Scott.
Scott, yes.
Thanks, Scott. So I just want to make sure I heard you right. Closing the books in a timely manner is a challenge for us.
It's a challenge with a couple things. I think prioritizing it and making sure it gets done, but also the manual labor that goes through within the system to get to your year-end numbers. Okay.
And that's our software program?
It's your software program is one that is not used by many municipalities at all. Most of them have updated that software package years ago, so you're still using that. And the fact that I think if you look at a lot of communities across the state, boards of ed in the town, and sometimes even sewer departments are sharing the same software package, so you're gaining efficiencies with that. But it is, and Anna can speak to the specifics, but it is quite cumbersome to close those books with that system.
So remind me, if you would be so kind, how many
Absolutely.
years in a row have you brought that particular issue to our attention?
I've been here probably 5 to 6 years, and I probably have mentioned that probably 4, maybe, the first year we got used to the town, but probably over the last 4 years. Now, it's easy for me to come up and say a new system, but there's a price tag with the new system, right?
Right, I understand.
Yeah, so, but it is something that I think you should consider, just
And-
from an operational standpoint.
Order of magnitude on the software, back of a napkin, 50, 100, 250, give me something. Just
About how much it would cost.
Yeah.
Um,
400. Well, I'm asking Scott.
Yeah, well, I've heard prices, and there's, software has changed. Now you can keep it in the
I won't
cloud.
I promise I won't
Okay,
quote you.
I'm not a software vendor, so I would say somewhere in the neighborhood of $300,000 to $400,000.
Okay, that's all I need, back of a napkin.
Okay.
That's good.
But with that, if you ever examine a software package, in my opinion, you also want to examine like the modules that may go with it, okay? Because the modules sometimes are key to making it much more efficient. And I've seen really nice software packages purchased, just say for $300,000 or $400,000, and the extra 10 or 15 wasn't spent for the correct module. And you gain some efficiencies, but not the efficiencies you'd gain with what a particular module could do for you, like a bank reconciliation module, a cash receipt module, so things like that. I would certainly consider if you ever had some vendor, if you ever go out to RFP, those type of questions would be pertinent questions to ask.
Okay, so Camille, I don't know, I'm interested very much to hear what Mark's view is on this. He wasn't here when Scott brought this up, but I'm interested to hear Mark's thoughts on the software issue, and I don't know if you want to talk about that now, or you want to wait till Scott has a chance to go through the
I'll
audit?
throw it in now.
I think this is an important one, and I think we should stay on it.
Okay. So Mark, you weren't here when...
I know, we've
No.
been through this several times. Every year, Scott brings us this, and it's a cost. It's a cost factor that when we're trying to trim the budget, can we go one more year of putting in the sweat and tears, blood, sweat, and tears, instead of pushing a button? And we continue to do this.
I think we
We
cut it
also,
this year every time we plan for it.
what's that?
I think we reduced it this year every time we try to plan for it.
Also, with, we wanted to respect the fact that we had a new finance director coming into the Board of Ed, and she, although very talented and an extremely wealth of we've heard this story, the 3 years I've been here, and at least 2 years when I sat as Deputy First Selectman, it was something we were trying to do. I'm not sure if it's a priority, because we're still getting the job done. It's not like, we can't balance the books, we can't get to the audit system. We are. But it takes a long time, it takes a lot of man hours. Can we reduce man hours? That would be a question to Anna, that if we had this and we pushed a button and it was all done, could we lose man hours, therefore it would almost pay for itself in the long run? That would be the key, right? I'm not sure that's the case.
So I have a few points just to make with regard to this discussion. The first being that I think last year I brought it up, that I thought it was sort of embarrassing that it took, 8 months to close the books. This year it took 12 months. So we still have the same system. We still have the same procedures in place. How in the world did we go from 8 months to 12? That would be my first question. My second question is, not so many months ago, we approved a few $1,000s for a module for this accounting system to eliminate a lot of the manual redundancy that we heard was happening. So how much did that shave off of the actual closing period? Did that help at all?
Those questions to Anna, right?
Anybody that has the knowledge?
So the additional module that we purchased was to allow us to be able to upload the tax system batches into the accounting system. So that's just a piece of cash receipting. And the benefit of that is that we know what the batches are going to be, and it assists us in getting the documentation to confirm the batches from the tax office. In the past, when we didn't have that ability, it was more cumbersome for us to do that. So to that end, it saves time in getting the work done, that piece of the work done on a monthly basis, and it assists us when we go to reconcile the accounting system to the tax system, because we're able to create reports to know what the batches are and know what the tax collector owes us. So it's that one piece. There are many other aspects, but that has been very helpful. And this is actually the first July tax season that we're going to use it. If you recall, that system came into play in January. So this is the first full tax season that we're using that.
So if you had to give me 3 reasons why we went from an 8-month closing period to 12 months, what would those 3 reasons be? I think I heard Scott say that one of the reasons was that we were just even further behind in getting the data to them, and that goes into their busy season, and they're not able to address it during their busy period. But leading up to that, what were the 2 other major causes? I mean, nothing's really changed in the past 4 or 5 years. We have the same system, we have the same people, we have the same processes.
Well, we did have some turnover in internal staff that we had some hiccups with in getting them acclimated to the system and learning how to work on balancing their work. So there was a learning curve there, and I think we're over that. We're over that now, moving forward.
Who was the new person that came
Well,
on board in the past year?
Not new employees, but we had employees leaving, and so other employees moving to those jobs that caused us some issues.
Okay, so that's one. There was a learning curve involved with new employees coming into the accounting and finance department. Okay, well, what would you say the second reason is? If any. I mean, it's not a trick question. If there is no other reason, I'll accept that.
I really don't have, any other reasons.
I mean, like, do you have sufficient time? It doesn't seem like you do, because you have too much to do. Is that a leap? I don't mean it as a trick question either. I'm trying to understand how important this system is. I'm certainly not a subject matter expert, but I'm thinking between you, Anna, and Scott, and Mark, you 3 people are the best poised to decide if the costs outweigh the benefits to go into this. And we've heard this as a recurring problem for 6 years. Mark brings up the point that maybe it's not a priority, and maybe it's not. I don't know. But I kind of would feel better if, first of all, are you three the best people to make that decision?
Well,
Start with that.
I don't know if we're the best, I don't know if I'm the best person to make that decision, but I think one of the ways you could test it, I think, and then you could maybe make a better decision as a group, is, once Ann and I sit down, we can work backwards. There's some key dates that we would all have to meet, right? And if we could come back and communicate, whether it be an ad hoc committee of your full board and say, hey, we're gonna be able to make these dates, because we have prioritized, or the system's working better, or the people, the education, the training of the people have worked better, you may be able to make a more informed decision. So maybe this year, maybe my suggestion would be, Ann and I develop a plan, we come back to you as a board and say, okay, here are the key dates. And if you miss one of those key dates, whether it be caused by turnover or whatever, at least you have an explanation for it. If you're missing it because you are still struggling with the system and nothing
Right.
has changed, then I think you have information to make a more educated,
Yeah, that makes sense.
more educated decision. So, honestly, going back here, there's more than 3 reasons why it happened, but thinking of them all, we had turnover, we didn't get back, so when you stop and start, you always take a step backwards instead of being efficient as you continue through a job. You gotta pick it up, where were we? And so those are certainly some inefficiencies that we can't encounter anymore.
But isn't it common practice to rotate junior auditors, if you will, on a municipal audit, just to give a fresh set of eyes? And
Well-
wouldn't we account for that?
We do, we don't like to do it too often, but we do rotate people through. We did lose our key manager this year, and Jen Mascola, who I think presented with me for a couple of years, was certainly an integral part of the audit, an integral part of the town. So again, if you wanted to think of 3 things, losing Jen certainly on our side, who has such an integral knowledge of the town and the system, working with the system to get here, slow this down a bit. But then if you think about
I'm sure she was probably younger than our system was, is.
maybe. So I would suggest that, let Ann and I meet next week, and then come back with you maybe in September, and say, here's some key dates that we thought of, and here's how we, work with Mary Ann also as far as the board ed side go, and here's how we're gonna make the deadline. And then, come December, January 1st, either we made it or we didn't, but at least you have a working knowledge of what's happened over the last 5 months that maybe has delayed it. Okay?
So what's a reasonable time frame that the books should close?
Well, if, I would say,
It's typical.
I would say that from June 30th to September 1st, you're still closing up some of the year ends. So I would say somewhere around October 15th is a good date for a hard close.
Okay.
And if you have a good hard close, and I mean a hard close, what, just talking the basic accounting, is that you close your trial balance, and you have your reconciliations are done, things are tied back and forth, and things are ready for audit.
So that's 3.5 months.
Yeah.
And we took
that's
12.
being-
And we
that's-
haven't closed yet because
Thought
we
that was
haven't
5 or 6.
done our transfers on our side.
So,
No, she's talking about 17.
Oh, yeah.
Everything, so if
Thanks.
you work, the summer, September 1st is the key date for the Board of Ed. They file some state reports.
Can we give Scott a mic, please, for the,
They file some key reports on September 1st, okay, that are due to the state of Connecticut. One of the other things that I think is a little cumbersome here is gathering the capital assets and the fixed assets each year, so pulling that together. I spoke to Ann a little bit about that, and she was hoping to maybe accelerate that and get that done here in the summer, if not before Labor Day. That would help. But I think, just reflecting back on, okay, what are some key dates that won't slow us up, I think is really important. So I think we should come back to you and say, okay, here's the plan, and let's see what happens.
Especially that's important because now we are into a new year that
Yeah.
we need to close. And I
Yeah.
think, now is a perfect time to put that work plan on the agenda under old business. So we will revisit this in September, and this board will gladly take a look at the plan
Yeah.
that gets put in place.
And then what we-
And hard target
Yeah.
dates with deliverables.
And then what we do, once we have those dates set up, what we could do, and it just would be, weekly call, how we doing? And Mariana and Anna would be on the phone, and whoever else from the departments that would have to be on the phone. That seems to help. And I think, doing that, I think is probably a nice practice just to, you see if we can accelerate it.
Okay.
So Lisa has a habit of asking my questions just before I do.
Oh, sorry.
So most of
Well,
those are
that's
covered.
the
The
way
only
it is.
question I have is this year's 50% longer to close than last year. Is this just an outlier? It was last year 20, 30% greater than the year before that, Have we been going 6, 8, 12 months? Or we just?
No, this year certainly was an outlier. I think the past couple years prior to that, it was around February or so that we were closed. This year, again, from our standpoint, books, some turnover on our standpoint, some turnover. So I think this one was an outlier.
So if you had better trained staff on both sides.
So if
then
we didn't have turnover, I think that might be a
If you
better
had more
word.
proficient staff on
Yeah.
both sides, you could have done less than 8 months this year.
Right, and quite honestly, if we're not done by January 15th of 2018, I really have to pull my people, okay? I mean, that, being quite frank with you, that's what we have to do. And so that's why this working document and meeting these deadlines are important. Now, it's not a hard January 15th, but we have to be very close to the finish line by then.
Thank you.
Yes, Beth?
Thank you. It sounds like it's a shared responsibility and what needs to be done
Yes,
from the town's point of view and also
It's a fair
your
point.
responsibility.
yes.
To come up with that timeline, and also maybe with the new finance director over on the school side, who's knowledgeable on the town side, I think that conversation of what software would work for both of you, exploring that, and as was discussed, and also getting the hard deadlines that both of you can agree to, and that this board will have to make the commitment to make it a priority and not cut it like we usually do. So that has to be the board's commitment to do that after there's been due diligence on exploring what software program would work. But I appreciate the fact that both of you are gonna take responsibility for that and come up with a deadline that you both can commit to, given your staffing concerns, giving your staffing concerns, giving your delays, whatever, 'cause it's a new page.
Fair enough.
Yeah, because I think we'd have to see a cost-benefit analysis to say that, I need to spend $400,000. I can't just hire somebody else for $60,000 to fill that gap.
Right.
Because there may be a much more efficient way to do this.
Yeah, we
Don't know
need
yet.
info to make the
Need
decision.
data, need data.
Yes, and so does everybody to make the decision, but a commitment to do it.
You were going to show us stuff in one of these
Sure.
books, or
Sure.
which one of the three are we?
We're going to start with the thicker book, the financial report. And I was going to, first I'll start off, pages 3 through 8 is the management discussion and analysis, and that really, in a narrative format, speaks to the financial highlights that happened in the town of East Lyme for the year ended June 30, 2016. The town received a clean, unqualified opinion, unmodified opinion for the year, so you received a clean opinion. The report has been filed with all your bonding and EMA and all the requirements with the state and federal government, so that requirement, those have all been met. But to talk through some of the numbers, I think, I'll start off on page 15. Page 15 is your, basically your major funds and your operating fund, which is your general fund of the town. You can see there on a budget of approximately $66 million, you had unassigned fund balance of $5.1 million. It's the third number from the bottom in the first column. That's the number when you go through your budget process. What do we have as unassigned fund balance? So you have $5.1 million, which is roughly 7.6% of those total expenditures. Then the second question would be, which is asked to me, as an auditor, is what's the range that people shoot for, or is there a targeted range? There is no set range that the state says, or the federal government, or anybody says, of what your fund balance should be. But people will say it should be anywhere between 5 and 15%, depending on the size of the town, okay? the smaller the town, the higher the percentage of expenditures, just based on, if there was a natural, a disaster, the same amount of money would cost to do something. So, a number that you should continually watch. But it was just a small decrease of last year by about $125,000, so not bad. The sewer assessment fund and the water department are two other major funds that are pretty consistent with the prior year. And you also have a bonded project fund, which we did issue bonds for in the current year. But the main operating fund that closes out each year is really the general fund, because you start with new revenues each year. Every July 1st, new revenues come in, and you start with your budget. So there's a small decrease there of $127,000. If you turn to page 16, I did mention that you did issue some bonds at the end of the year, about $6.2 million worth of bonds as of June 30, 2016. And then your total fund balance for the general fund was $5.8 million, but $700,000 of your general fund balance is assigned, meaning you had tentative plans for that money at the end of the year. About $2 million, about $7.5 million in capital expenditures during the year. A lot of that had to do with infrastructure expenditures in 2016. And you can see there that the total revenues, which include an on-behalf calculation from the state of Connecticut, of about $73 million, compared to expenditures of about $74 million, which had the small decrease of $127,000 for the year. So that's your main operating fund. So pretty much you, from a $66 million budget, came really, really close to where you anticipated that you'd be. One of the other funds I know we've talked about in the past is on page 19. And we talk about the sewer fund. And I presented to that department. But in the sewer fund, each year there's a loss of about $750,000 to $800,000, and that's associated with your depreciation. As you set your budget, you're not including the expense for depreciation in your budget as you pass that budget. So something to consider. The loss isn't a surprise, but it's something, as you go through the budget techniques, you should, what depreciation does is really setting aside for repairs and maintenance. And you have a large asset there. So again, it's just a budget. So the loss doesn't surprise me, but it's really a budgeting technique. That is why, as you set in your revenues and expenditures, you're not setting that portion for depreciation. If you were a pure commercial type entity, you would.
On your sewer line, I'm sorry, you're talking about the sewer depreciation?
Yeah.
Okay. And then on the other side, general activities, that's something totally different, so you wouldn't have any depreciation on that side anyway.
That's correct. Right.
Okay,
Yep.
sorry.
Yep. And then the other fund.
Well, could I ask
Yeah,
you on that?
absolutely.
So should we be setting aside?
Well, I mean, from
you
a
say we
pure,
don't, should
from a
we?
best practice standpoint, here's how I explain it. From a best practice standpoint, if the idea of that enterprise fund is to capture, on a commercial basis, all the expenditures, if that's the purpose of that fund, to be self-sufficient and self-sustaining, then you should, right? If you were setting a budget to,
Yeah.
that would be how a budget would be set. If it would be, an enterprise fund is close to commercial accounting, so certainly you may want to take a look at that. But the other thing in this fund that you don't have is you don't have the debt service associated with it either. You're not carrying the debt in the fund either. So, we've talked about what's the right makeup of this fund as far as categorization goes. Right now, the design really isn't to be based on the budgetary, and this isn't what you've done as a Board of Finance. This is years and years and years in the making from when the system started. The debt is parked within the governmental funds and not in the business type activities. So something to think about.
And
So-
that's been a long time coming in terms of, that issue about, it's our full faith and credit, even though it's a separate
Yeah,
entity.
yeah. I mean, I don't think you would ever, I don't think you'd ever
I
get.
don't know how you legally
Yeah.
detangle that. I mean, does that
Well,
require a charter change?
Well, I don't think you would ever be able to issue revenue bonds. A revenue bond is something different than a general obligation bonds.
Right, right.
But from you could still issue general obligation bonds, and it would still be the full faith and credit of the town, which
Right.
many communities do. But part of the debt service could be paid with the revenues that are generated from an enterprise fund.
So from the enterprise funds, whatever they generate could help pay down the debt service on the town side.
It
And that
could.
might be happening anyway, I'm just saying.
Yeah, I mean, it could. I mean, if you were to take the sewer fund and just park it over here as a pure commercial fund, right? Where there was an outside government supplementing, they'd have to pay the debt service, right? And they'd have to be, but it's not said, and I'm not saying it's wrong. I'm saying that's just the nature of the fund, the way the design of the fund here is in the town of East Lyme. So, and I just brought up, because anytime you see a loss, you might say, geez, what's causing that? So it's a little bit deeper than just that one number as you look up the makeup of that fund.
So if we did use revenues to offset the debt service on the government side, this loss would be even greater.
If you did use revenues,
If
Well,
we-
if you
If we
increase-
use water and sewer
well, if
revenues
you
to
did,
offset the debt
if you,
obligations.
right, if you
on the
kept
s-
your revenue the same, right, if you kept the revenue the same, you would, it would decrease your cash flow, because you'd be paying the principal down, and the loss would be greater because you would be expensing the interest.
That's what I was gonna say.
Yeah.
Sorry, Lisa.
I'm having a little chuckle.
Yeah, she's got still my questions, you can still do it.
Well, I guess what I want to know in terms of
It's very
format,
complicated, but, that becomes very clear to us.
It's a complicated, design of the fund when you talk about an enterprise fund and, what supports it, right, and what's it supposed to be. And a lot of times, and especially here, and, when you live near the shore, it's the betterment of the town as a whole. And people have looked at it that way. And it's whatever revenues you can get to help with that. And that's, if you go down, whether it be, Waterford or Stonington or some of these other towns that are on the shore, well, there's a different design to it because of that.
so what I want to understand, and I guess this is for you, Camille, how do we want to, so here's two items I think that Scott brought to our attention that we might want to consider managing differently. We don't have to decide to do that tonight, but I see these as items to be talked about in the future, how we want to handle this depreciation on water and sewer. Correct me if I'm wrong.
Depreciation, I think when I'm not part of as you set the water rate, as you set the rate. As a town, you set the rate, if you set the rate, you're looking at your revenues. Cost to run, maybe the better way to explain it, the cost to run the system typically would be depreciation, right?
Yeah.
So that would increase your expenditures, right? And if you
Yes.
wanted to have a balanced budget, the offset of that would be on a user fee side. And I'm not saying to do that, but I'm just saying if you're going through that cost, if you're going through a rate study, when they do a rate study at some of these large WPCAs, that's part of the factor in when they determine what the rate is certainly depreciation.
So I'm not suggesting we do anything with it, but I don't want to lose the item. That's what I'm worried about. 'Cause
Well,
Scott brings up
you
all
want
these
your
little
tickler
gems.
Right. So
And-
this is really a question for the first selectman, to inform us how he intends to handle this situation. Is there a plan in place to handle this situation?
I don't know. I'll speak to the water sewer commission.
All right, but how do we track it? Because it falls off my stack. I'm having another birthday this month. So, yeah, so as Scott goes through these items for us to consider, I'm not saying what action we have to take, is there a way we can track them so that we can just come back and take some time to think about them, but they don't just,
Scott, do you make this presentation to water sewer commission?
I have,
Yes, you have.
yes,
So why don't we bring this up?
Yes,
When you make
good
a
point.
presentation to
Yep.
the water sewer commission, since this concerns their budgets and their
And then can you also add that, Anna, on the agenda for next month to revisit that? We'll put it under old business and we'll say review
And report back.
and report of
Oh, yeah, I just don't want to
auditors-
forget it.
Just put it on the agenda. under
Auditors'
old business.
concerns regarding the Water and Sewer
That's what I do
Commission.
with your items.
See, I kind of think it would be a good idea to just track all these gems, all these little recommendations in one spot, and then have a separate attachment with them, you know, what actions required, by when and whom, instead of listing 50 down here on the agenda, and then we
Yeah.
don't have any,
And we don't look at
we don't have any meat
this
behind it.
till next year. Yeah,
So I personally would like to see some action items come out of this.
she's got it. You got it,
Dates.
Anna, right? Old business,
All right.
next month.
Thanks.
Okay, good, thanks.
Okay, I was just going to turn to page 22. And really, I was just going to have you take a look at your pension trust fund, which have investments of $19.5 million as of end of June 30, 2016. And if you look at page 23, you can see we had a slight decrease, net depreciation in those assets from June 30, 2015, which is commonplace throughout the state, okay, for this year. Now, hopefully, whatever the market was as June 30, 17, we'll have it dictate what the appreciation was on the assets from, so you smooth it. So I guess I don't want to talk too much about pensions because I'm not an actuary, but when you set your actuary rate, your rate of return that you expect on your assets that are parked in that trust is 7%. So the actuaries won't come in and adjust that every year. They use what they call like a 5-year smoothing. So last year it could have been 16%, and this year was 0, say. So, but they'll smooth that. So, but the key there, and we'll get into the pensions in a little bit, is just what that smooth rate of return that the actuaries expect to get, and what's the benchmark. So you can never measure it within a 12-month point in time, because the actuaries take into a lot of data and when they calculate this out. So what I'm doing is I'm just saying, hey, this is what your assets were as of June 30th, and this was the decline in them. So but that isn't to alarm you to say, well, what are the actuaries doing? Well, the actuaries will have a nice chart to say, well, here's what it was, here's what we're earning, and this is why the rate of return of 7% that you're using right now is okay to use. So so it does get a little complex when you see these numbers here and talk to the actuaries. Okay, well, they're not supposed to agree because they're using something totally different than what we are as your CPAs.
Just a quick question on that. Looking at the employer contributions and the plan member contributions, would you say that that's a reasonable split between the two contributions?
I really don't have it. I couldn't.
I don't think he would be able to answer that unless he went into all our plans and looked at everything that we do in terms of unaffiliated union
No, I just mean
contract.
relative to other municipalities.
Yeah, I wouldn't have that off the top of my head as far as what the different rates are.
Okay, thank you.
Note 1, which is going to the body of the footnotes, really no big changes there in the current year. All your
I think
accounting.
our square miles went up. No.
I don't know, maybe. But note 1 is the same. Note 2 is just some reconciliations between the different bases of accounting that are used. But page 35, there is a lot of disclosure as far as your portfolio and your investments and things. And you can see you have some monies that are fixed income funds, which are almost like bond funds, and then you have your mutual funds of 19 million. So, and you can see they're pretty well rated there on page 35. Yeah.
That's pretty well rated at Bs and double
Yeah,
Bs?
it's a smooth out, so they're gonna have to
mix.
take some risk, right? They're gonna have to take a little bit of risk with the portfolio, right?
Yeah.
I think I'll take you to the pension note now. Okay. Page 50 and 51. I think these are numbers that impact your budget. So I'll talk a little bit about the pension disclosure and some things that do impact your budget. You can see there on page 50, I mentioned that the plan was funded at 73%. National average is around 70%. And remember, in a lot of states, if you have a defined benefit plan, you're required to contribute at the actually required contribution. Okay, so that's in the state of Connecticut, we don't have that law, but in many other states you do. If you have a defined benefit plan, you hit the arc. So you're at 73%, and then you look at the assumptions that are being used. And the one I will say that if you're going to ask a question on when the actuaries make a presentation, would be your mortality rate, your mortality tables. Those are changing. And as mortality tables changed, life expectancies in the newer mortality tables are expanded, okay? So that impacts what the total liability is. So for the first few years, I think, when we went to these new pension standards, we talked about rate of return, which would have a big impact, right? Now, I think what they're doing in the actuary world is they're looking at mortality tables. Actually, 3 years ago, they came up with a new standard table that would be used in commercial industries, but it excluded public sector type, government type agencies, and they're very close to developing a table for that. So as your actuaries come in, you might want to ask that question, okay, what's going on with the mortality tables, and what type of impact will that have on our calculation of our liability? So just something that's come down the pike that you might want to take a look at.
Yeah, if you want to just mention it, we're already.
Yeah.
Yes, so currently, the pension committee had authorized having that study done.
Oh,
And we're actually going to have a presentation on it later this month.
Super, thanks.
Before you leave this, the pension plan being funded at 73%, is a 5% drop from last year a big deal, or is that?
Well, I think now, as I mentioned, this is being measured right now at a point in time, which is new with the new standard. So your liability is calculated out, but because your assets didn't perform as they had in the prior year, you had a little bit of loss. Now you're really measuring as of June 30th. Come September 30th of 2016, it was probably back up over that 77%. It's certainly a point in time now, which is an important factor. When I, as your external auditor, come in and audit, we're auditing as of a date. Your actuaries are looking at as more of a smooth thing.
That's why
So
I'd look at trends, and
Yeah.
that's why I'd look back at last year, and
Yeah.
maybe even the year before, if it was
Right.
available, to
Yeah.
see if.
yeah, absolutely. And then the only other item I will call to your attention that will have an impact 2 years from now, actually, is your other post-employment benefits. And it's going to be a change in accounting. And just your accrued liability based on your July 2014 valuation was was $10.5 million.
What page you on, Scott?
Excuse me, page 57. The bottom chart there, $10.5 million is what the actuaries compute to say, okay, what do you have as post-employment benefits out there to pay to your retirees? So that's going to change. Right now, you have a liability recorded of about $6 million for OPEB. In 2 years, there'll be a $4 million increase on that just by a change in accounting policy. So that's the big accounting policy, that our accounting standard that's coming into play in July of 2018. Excuse me, June of 2018. So a change in accounting, and that just rolls. Now, that doesn't change your benefits. It doesn't change how people get paid. It's just moving something a little bit from a GAAP standpoint, or from the GASB standpoint, something that's a little bit more transparent, and it's moving it there. So your actuaries will be talking about that too here the next, as Anna goes through the new valuation.
So dumb that down for me.
Okay.
I'd like to change the way they measure things every couple of years.
Right,
Well,
but how is
okay,
that
okay, well,
gonna
let me,
impact the town?
I'll try to measure it
It
now.
doesn't.
Right now, I'll try to explain, okay.
Just briefly.
Okay.
I mean, I don't mean to,
8 years ago, nothing was recorded. You didn't have any liability recorded for OPEB. It was just pretty much a disclosure.
Yeah.
You're going to owe these retirees $10 million, okay? So then 10 years ago, they said, well, we got to do something. And instead of just throwing the 10 million, probably looked, oh, let's record the $10 million all at once. What they did is say, well, if the required contribution is $1 million a year, and you're contributing $500,000 a year, you're going to record 500,000 as a liability. So you accumulate that 500, got you to the 6 million. Now they're saying, well, that's really not a measurement. That's just a measurement of what you missed your required contribution in.
Yeah.
It's not a measurement of what the true liability is, right? So now what GASB came in and said, look, okay, we've given you a chance. We're changing the standards, mirroring what we did for the pension plans, and it's going to be what is that liability and what's the actuary forecast as of June 30th of what you owe for OPEB. And that's where, for some communities, it's a big, big number, and it's going to be a big hit.
so how do we have to react to that?
You don't, I mean, it's not going to change any, it's an accounting standard change. It's not a management change. Okay?
All right, thanks.
So those were the financial highlights going through the report. I would say not really any surprises there as far as fluctuations in budget and notes and things of that nature. 2 years ago, we had the drinking water notes that we brought on, but this year is pretty standard financial statements. From a federal and state standpoint, pretty consistent. The big drinking water fund that we had 2 years ago, that's not, that project ended. And the two comments we have to do with, really adjusting entries and closing the books on a timely basis, as we start off our discussion, that we will work on and get back to you in September as far as our plan and how involved the board would like to be as the oversight committee of the audit.
Okay. So the one thing that we did,
Yes,
the
Bill?
one thing we didn't touch on when we talked about this schedule and taking 12 months instead of 8 months because of inadequate software or antiquated software, is there a quality element to that? Is there some things that maybe the older software is missing, or we have potential for some type of financial escapes or anything like that? Or is it just pure, takes a lot of hours to get there, but quality-wise, at the end, we're going to be 100% sure
Well,
that our books are our books?
I think, a couple things I'd say, and I look at it this, the monthly reports, like if you're looking from your budget to actual reports from a general fund side, we do have some adjustments, but from that pure operating standpoint, where there's not material adjustments for those type of payroll and vendors being paid to the general fund. So from a quality standpoint, I'm answering your question. Things that you make decisions on based on monthly reports, I would say that they're accurate. Okay, there's not a big flaw in the data to say, geez, why didn't we know that? That my decision would have been different if this audit adjustment would have gone through. Okay, so that's the, but now
The balances of the separate
Yeah.
accounts and all that
yeah,
type of
yeah.
stuff.
So that's the focus. So that's your primary account. That's your focused account. Everybody keeps their eye on that one, right? Because that's budget and you renew it. But then you have these other accounts that you're probably not keeping as close of eye on. Okay, and that's where you talk about quality. It could become an issue because we're looking at those maybe not as frequently as, or closing those as frequently as they could be closed based on the system.
So, I'm trying to find my notes. What book did I tell you? What book did I tell you that was in? So, I'm looking for the executive summary here. Kind of a big picture, right?
Yep.
One of your concerns is our software. We talked through that.
Yeah.
What was the other concern?
Well, I think closing the books timely.
But that's because of the software. is what I-
Well, I mean, prioritizing
Related.
and closing and prioritizing, making sure that, hey, these are the dates that we're going to hit.
Okay. Yeah. I'm still
And
listening.
eliminating the number of adjusting entries that are made after year end. And I think that gets to your point where you talk about quality as we come in and we're making entries after year end and maybe making those more on a monthly or quarterly basis. So the heavy lifting at the end of the year isn't as much. So I think it all comes together. You know, is it going to be pushing a button with the new system? I don't want anybody to think, oh, the system's just going to make it that much. It's going to make it easy, and we're going to push a button, everybody's going to be happy. You know, there's going to be some work and reconciliation, but it gives you an opportunity to maybe re-engineer your processes and look at your internal control structure to say, well, maybe this is the best use of someone's time, so we hit these deadlines, so there's different reports to look at. And right now, there's probably a lot of busy work that's going on, that's being done, and it's being done correctly, but that could maybe be replaced with some more efficient work
Yeah.
that would help you.
So, okay, is there any other major concerns that you want to bring to our attention?
No, I really think the major concern, in my view, is that, you know, we get on track and issue the statements in a more timely manner.
Okay, so let's talk about the summary you put in the booklet to the finance,
Yep.
Board of Finance. I think I read in here that these are deficiency, they're considered somewhat minor. I'm on page something that has no page number on it, but it says RSM on it, on the
Okay,
top of your
okay. Is
letter.
this a report to the,
This,
the management?
it's also in the book, though.
Management, okay, got it. Okay, sure.
So I'm reading that,
Yeah, these are less, these are what we call management letter comments, so
Yeah.
these are less significant than the
Understand.
other two.
okay, I understand. So my first observation is they're all recurring. You brought them
Yep.
all to our attention, at least last year, if
Yep.
not more,
Mm-hmm,
right?
yes.
How many years would you say you brought these to our attention?
Guessing a few
Three-
years,
three or
3 or
four?
4 years, yeah.
Okay. So, we didn't take action on them last year for one reason or another. The up-to-date accounting and policy procedures manual, you brought that to our attention, that's a recommendation.
Yep.
What do we have to say about that, Mark and Anna? Do we feel that's important? Do we agree with Scott? Is that on our radar? Do we have resources for that?
had it on a kicker
I know, but I want to hear from Anna and Mark on this.
Yeah, okay, so I agree. I do have some policies in place. It could be more complete than it is, and it's a matter of, you know, bringing it up on the priority level.
Okay, is that something that's, I feel like we almost said this last year, but is this achievable? I mean, do we have an overall work plan? If it's not important, I mean, I don't want to go after bug dust, I know we can't do that. But if we feel it's important, then we need to get it done, right?
I could comment on that.
Please do.
In your list of priorities, I think, depending on the direction you go with the software system,
Mhm.
this is a priority item.
It is.
Is not.
It is not,
It
okay.
is not, until you get to another step in your process.
Okay, that's good to know.
Okay, so I would say that
Because they very likely may change
they
based on a
may
new
change,
system.
and you may get built-in controls within a system.
Mhm.
Okay.
So I would say,
I
from a
think
priority
going back to the
standpoint, we
beginning with your
will mention
target
it to
dates.
you, and it's good to have, because what happens if Anna goes and there's nothing, and who steps in?
Yeah.
So that's one of the reasons, you know, we would mention it to you as far as keeping efficiencies, but to write one now, if you're contemplating changing, you'd be changing it again.
So
Okay.
are you saying, based on your audit, that none exists?
No, there's
Are you
policies and
saying
procedures.
to
but-
write one,
Priorities.
because you said to write one now?
Well, basically a policy and procedure manual, it would be something that just doesn't sit on the shelf. You know, you could pay someone to come in and write that for you, and that comment would go away. But then you'd have to look at the cost benefit, and if it's not kept up to date,
Yeah, living.
then if it's not, that's a good word. 2 years, it's out of date, right? Just based on, so I think as you approach that, and this is a common comment in many municipalities about accounting policy and procedure. It's actually a common comment in commercial entities too, because things are, you know, it's just maybe one, but it is, I think it is important, but right now, you know, maybe as Anna goes through the process this summer of what prioritizing and how she closes the book to meet the deadlines, maybe you could start a document, you know, just kind of keep it up a little bit. And now, would it get rid of this comment? Probably not, but it would be something that you're starting.
Yeah.
And probably would recognize some weaknesses in this system, because, you know, I like to do this through the system, but now I have to bring it out, put it on Excel, and do a lot of manual calculations with it. Probably not probably not the
Yeah,
best
no,
use
but
of
that's
time.
helpful, because, I
Yeah.
mean, you're right, I wasn't thinking that,
Yeah.
but that makes sense to do it after you get a system, so you're not reinventing the
Right.
wheel. So that helps.
Okay.
So the school lunch fund issue, not a big deal, but if it's not a big deal, I keep asking myself why it's not done.
I think Mary Ann and I had a debrief. I think she's gotten this one
Handled?
handled, I think, or working on it, Mary Ann, right?
Oh,
So
great. I
we
can't-
expect that to be gone in 2017. It's 18?
Whatever, you won't see it one day on your list.
The accrual basis will be for June 30, 2017, to
Right.
move it to our general budget this year.
To keep things in perspective, I know
Yeah.
this has come up every year since I've
Yeah.
been on the board, but I never really, that was never high on my priority list to address, but maybe to put it in perspective, what
What-
kind of exposure are we
For
talking
school-
about?
Well, I mean, I
What
think
kind of
any-
dollars?
Well, school lunch is there's a lot of money that goes through there.
Is it 200,000?
No, it's probably,
500,000? What type of,
I can tell you the
or
volume.
if you're gonna address that in your,
Oh, I can tell you the volume. 1 second here.
While Scott's looking that up, just so you're aware as well, we moved away from Chartwell's
right?
as having an outside contracted service, and we just hired our own food service director. So when we're hiring all of our own staff in that sense, so just get a better handle on this entire program. I think it's about 600,000.
Well, actually, the school lunch program, actually, it's almost $1 million.
What?
Yeah, between federal monies that come in and fees that come in.
Ouch.
That's with all the schools, so it's a big,
Yeah.
it's a big program, right?
And that's year-round, that summer meals program, it's,
It's probably everything that
everything?
goes through there,
1
yeah.
million?
So, most of all of it's fee-based and it comes in, so, there's volume there, right? And so, I think the main thing there is, QuickBooks doesn't have the controls over it that, the general ledger system does, so that's why I think you bring it up. So you get about $300,000 for the federal money that comes through for the school lunch fund, and about another $700,000 in fees.
wow, it's
Yeah, so
huge.
it is big.
Okay, so I'm hearing though we're gonna neck down on that, right? Purchase orders and invoices, another repeat, open item. Help me out with that, somebody on the priority.
Well, here's how I look at that. If you have a policy in place that purchase orders are required, and that policy isn't being followed,
Wow,
then if it's not being followed, you got a couple change, you can either change the policy and say, your purchase orders above this amount, we're going to do that. But, I mean, if we look at it, if we see an invoice dated March 1st, and then the purchase order dated March 15th, well, that defeats the control of a purchase
so
order.
how does that happen?
Unless you have a control in the purchasing policy that says that department heads are authorized to
Yeah.
approve up to X number of
Yeah,
dollars.
so it could be looking at, so
That's,
kind of,
we're working on that one.
it looks, so there's efficiencies there, and there's things that can be looked at, but but you have a policy now. We, as your auditors, come in, if the policy's not being followed, this is just a control deficiency, but, we're obligated to report that to you.
Did you look at the policy, the
Yeah,
purchasing
Yeah.
policy?
So,
We talked about that
Yeah.
for subcommittee
Yeah,
now,
yeah.
was that specific.
Yeah.
one.
yeah, so,
And we're talking about a waiver policy, so when expenditures do have to happen immediately, that there's a policy that's followed.
Yeah.
I mean, understandably, there are some expenditures.
Yeah, that would
need
make
to happen
sense.
immediately.
so
We're talking
it has to be
about-
workable.
Right, so it's
Yeah.
just not there's a waiver, but there's a, there's
Yeah.
a procedure to follow for the
Yeah,
waiver. So
absolutely, yeah.
We're on this.
Okay,
All right.
All right.
so then that will be kind of chipped away at with your subcommittee.
So I think what I'm hearing is if our procedure, if our purchasing procedure addresses what's authorized to purchase before the
Invoice date.
PO is, if there's something in our policy that says that a department head can,
It's allowable for X.
Yeah.
Yeah, then we're in
then
compliance.
that issue
Yeah.
goes away.
Yeah, so you want to make sure it's allowable
Your
for
point
X,
is-
up to X.
yeah.
And then if not, and then once you do that, the key then is to training the department heads, here's the new policy, and if you're not following this policy, well, then there's,
Because our understanding is what's actually happening isn't bad, it's just, it doesn't line up with the
line up,
policy.
exactly.
You know,
And that's why, we'd have this as a much higher level of a deficiency than what it is right now. We have it just as a control deficiency, which is the lowest kind of deficiency we report to you.
So the last item is the ledger item, general ledger. We're not on the same system as Board of Ed.
Yeah, and I mean, that's just a comment
Yeah.
from an efficiency standpoint, and really, that's a cost-benefit one.
Right.
And that's really just, I mean, good, bad, or indifferent. It's a management
Yeah.
decision, not an auditor's decision.
Anna, do you have any comments on the audit? Just from your standpoint, does it kind of ring true for you? Are you in disagreement with anything? Okay, good, thank you.
Okay, so just to address some concerns on this end of the table, we will work our way down, and everybody will have an opportunity to ask questions regarding the audit and the
I'm all
findings.
set.
You're all set?
Yep.
Okay, thanks. So I will go next. I am confused, because when I read your opinion letter, it says that the financial statements are presented fairly in all material respects. Generally, it's a good opinion letter.
It's a clean opinion.
We pass.
Yes.
And then I read this letter, and I'm not really sure of the date, to the Honorable First Selectman and members of the Board of Finance, where it spells out, during the course of our audit of the basic financial statements of the town of East Lyme, Connecticut, the town, as of and for the year ended June 30th, 2016, we identified deficiencies in internal control over financial reporting. Then it goes on to describe the different types of deficiencies that could exist. So that, to me, is strong language. So I'm
Okay,
I'm
so.
trying to
No,
reconcile
that's a
the two.
good question. Okay, so what we try to do with when we give an unqualified, the clean opinion that we talked about, the numbers in the presentation, we've done our audit work. We were able to state that the statements are materially correct and in conformity with generally accepted accounting principles. During that work, we identified deficiencies in the internal control structure that although we aren't giving you an opinion on your internal controls, we certainly during the course of our audit saw some weaknesses. And one of our responsibilities, if we see weaknesses, although they can be corrected through audit adjustments to make sure that the financial statements are transparent and materially correct to a user, you know, there's ways within your control system that your control system, the items that we just went through can be improved. So one, if we were, so I guess, not to get too technical, but say if we had the scope limitation and we just couldn't find audit documentation or something like no supporting documentation to support a number, and it was material, well, we'd have to qualify our opinion, because I couldn't say that they're materially correct and there was no departures from GAAP or GAS. And that's what I'm saying there. What the letter that you're talking about really has to do with, again, internal control, something totally different than what I'm reporting on within your
Right,
basic
right,
financial
right.
statements.
But weakness of internal control can lead to
Weak-
exactly what you're saying.
A
which is-
weakness of internal control is something, there's material significant in the control deficiencies, which are the 4 or 5 we just went through with the letter that you addressed.
Right. So
Um,
are there more weaknesses in internal controls and deficiencies documented elsewhere? Or
No,
is it
no,
all
this-
contained right here?
Here, I mean, there wouldn't be, you know, there's probably more deficiencies out there.
But based on your
But based on
sample
our
audit?
audit, just to get to that opinion, it might not have come to our attention, okay?
Okay.
So next year, we may focus on another department and have another weakness, okay?
Mm-hmm.
But so, you can't equate one with the other, okay? One is just saying, yeah, these statements are materially correct, but to get here, we saw these weaknesses in your controls that we have a responsibility to report to you.
Okay. So, to me, this is alarming. I feel like we're spinning our wheels year after year. Now, I've been here, you know, many years, and year after year, I just see the same things. Starting with the accounting, well, let me start with the easy ones.
Okay.
The accounting software, you know, that has been on our agenda for many years. It is a financial concern, an issue, and we don't have the money to make that a priority. 2, the school lunch fund, as I mentioned, that was never really on my radar because I wasn't aware of the significance of the dollar impact of that. Shame on me, I should have been. And now I understand maybe it will be taken care of by a new program that's going to be put into place. So that's good, I feel good about that. The purchase orders and invoices. So concerning to me is that this is something very, very simple in my mind that could have been addressed in 1 or 2 months. We have been trying this board for 2 years to get an adequate policy brought to us. So if something so basic takes over 2 years, I am very concerned about the accounting policy and procedures manual. Because this was an audit item going back to 2013. And this board was promised by May 2014, okay? So now we're talking over 3 years ago, that we would have something to look at the May 2014 Board of Finance. We have never seen anything. We had asked for it several times. It never made its way onto an official item on our agenda. And I'm asking you now, also add that on the old business, policies and procedures. I understand that's a low priority, but in my mind, it's not, because audits are exactly that. It's a sample audit. There could be things happening that we should be aware of that we're not. And this is a good starting point. I would like to see what you have, what exists, and I would like to see that next month. So while it is true that a policy and procedure manual can get completely outdated and it's a living document and it has to be kept up with, we need to assign responsibility for this and make it somebody's part of their job description, which is something else that I've asked for many, many years. Let's see job descriptions. Let's see roles and responsibilities. How else can this board ensure that these audit items are being addressed? We get together once a month, right? 36 times in 3 years. You know, it's gotten to that point where it has to make its way onto the agenda because we'd like to see progress, something. If I were in the private sector and got a letter like this, people's jobs would be at stake. This is shameful. So put that on the agenda for next month. We're going to start looking at policies and procedures. I want to see job descriptions. And I would like assurance from the first selectman that if policies are put into place and they are not followed, that there is some consequence to non-conformance to policies. And that's all I have to say about the audit report. Thank you very much, Scott.
And my only comment is, I thank you very much for presenting the audit and for your information, and I have no comment as to narratives.
I'm good. But the questions that I came here with have been answered, and I'm good.
So, you know, my feedback to you is that Ann and I will meet in the next week. We'll get a target plan, and we'll go with communication and see how we make those to expedite the audit for next year, for 2018. I can commit to that.
Okay,
Okay.
thank you.
Thank you.
Okay.
I think it would be helpful if you have these action items, if somehow or another you could quantify their impact, because I attend many, many audits, and sometimes there's findings that are just FYI, just towards continuous improvement. There's
Yep.
always things that can
Yep.
always be better.
Yep.
There's no perfect process.
No.
But if there are minor deficiencies, it just
Yep.
would be nice to have as opposed to need to have somehow
Yeah.
or another to quantify that difference.
Okay. Okay.
Good
We can look
comment.
at that. Absolutely.
Thank you, Scott.
Okay. Have a nice night. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. With that, we move on to the second section of reports from the Board of Ed.
gave our Board of Education member the night off as pinch hitting, and I knew we'd be here anyways. So first, let me just again introduce Mariana Stevens, our new Finance Director. We're excited that she's on board, and I think she's going to do great things with our office and our district. So we're happy to have her on board. I want to give a quick update on the school projects. Let you know where we stand. A lot has occurred this summer. One of the biggest things that has occurred most recently, this past Monday night, we announced, actually the Town Building Committee Chair, Ray O'Connor, announced the construction management firm that we'll be working with our construction manager for the projects, and that is O&G. We ended up going with O&G. We had 6 firms that put in an RFQ, and then we got down to 4 with an RFP, and interviewed the 4 firms, lengthy interviews, all did great. Very hard decision, but O&G came forth in the end. So they have been granted the job. So we're working out the contract with them now. So once we have them on board, we will start one of the big components of this project, the phasing of the schools and how we will go about over the 14 months of the projects, moving kids around amongst the buildings. Because all 3, if you remember, are going on at the same time. 14 months starting next June. So this time next year, late in the summer, we'll still be under heavy construction. We have the state has also verbally agreed to, we submit our information for reimbursement, so they've verbally given us an agreement. We have a meeting next Thursday, the 17th, up at the State Department, and we'll go through some of the components of what we submitted. With the filing of the plans, and our architect will be there, a member from O&G, Mariana, myself. So we will meet with them at that time and go through that. Hopefully we're all set and moving on. And then redistricting, I just wanted to make mention, we are still heavily in discussions with the Board of Ed on redistricting. Last night at the Board of Education meeting, today's Wednesday. Monday night at the Board of Education meeting, we had a firm come out and talk to us about assisting us in potentially in the redistricting process. It is all-encompassing. We did a lot of work on our own this past year. Didn't come to the final conclusion that the Board of Ed was exactly looking for. And we've gone back and forth back in October of last year about, should we look at maybe a firm assisting us with this process, trying to do it on our own. Long story short, we listened to a firm last night. So the Board of Ed is in discussions right now as to, and this could be funded potentially through the school projects, the money that we have allocated to help us in that process, because that is going to follow these projects. So that's the plan, and that's still on course. And then the only other thing that I wanted to make mention, the permanent maintenance account. I know you've got that on your agenda for later on. We continue some discussions with the Board of Ed, particularly our Facilities and Finance Committee. We'd like to try and have some sort of open dialogue with some members of the Board of Finance, some members of the Board of Ed, on how we can look to maybe either set something up or get your opinion, your feelings on it. We've got many Board of Ed member feelings on it, so I'm going to be reaching out in the near future to see if we can have some conversations, because I know that's been a topic that you've been wanting to discuss, and I just want to keep you updated as to where we stand with that.
So what do you suggest, Jeff? Do you suggest that Board of members come to your Board of Education meeting and get up for a public discussion and express their opinion, or are you looking to create a committee?
I was thinking more along the lines of a smaller committee where we can have some dialogue about it, particularly 2 or 3 of our Board of our subcommittee members of the board that have been heavily discussing this, and maybe 1 or 2 or 3 of you. However that might, however we could set that up, legally, of course,
Right.
To have some
Or
dialogue
taking
on that.
notes and making them
Exactly.
available for public.
Exactly. Yeah, this is a big decision, and we know we've talked about the fact that we're struggling a bit in raising. We go back to the turf field example, struggling a bit in raising the dollars to cover the cost of that eventually down the road. So what is going to be the best avenue to be able to raise money in an appropriate manner to fund projects of that nature, but not just this project, other projects too. So, but we could have some dialogue. So I can, my office can reach out and we can see what we can do.
Okay,
Okay.
okay.
I think that's budget. I mean, obviously we're still all waiting with bated breath as to what's going to happen with the, with the budget, which is just crazy. So, we'll be hopefully prepared at the time if, we need to do what we need to do. So that's all I have, unless you have any specific questions.
Well, last month, Lisa had suggested that the Board of Education fundraising
Oh, yes.
be included on the agenda, and I did approve the agenda, and I neglected to point out to Anna that it should be added. So, is there any specific questions you want to ask Jeff with regard to the fundraising?
No, I wonder
Or-
if that's not more of the same issue with the maintenance account, right? It's really a question of where we're going to get funding for.
Exactly, yes. And that, that we talked a little bit about that 10-year plan. I know my
Yeah.
assistant superintendent was here at the last meeting. We had started that document, actually have a draft, but we put this on hold. That same committee, our Finance Facilities Operations Committee, subcommittee of the board, is investigating the idea, do we need to look at a broader scope and maybe have an outside organization, I'll use Castle Booze as an example, come in and really give us a full facility study, and not necessarily elementary schools, because those are being renovated, but our middle school, high school, what are the needs that we need to address, and we get a professional opinion on that, and then we develop off of that and what needs to be done in a timely manner, and build this, again, we've got a draft document, but it needs to be populated more. So I'm not ready to hand this over or really show this. So the Board of Ed is still in those discussions at this point.
Have you looked at other towns to see if they have a long-range facilities plan?
Yes, actually, I have.
I'm a big
I've
proponent of
met-
not reinventing the wheel.
Exactly. And there's where different towns do it differently. Some use this unexpended funds account. Some have just set up through like a CNRE type account. So it varies. One in particular, has a line item in their operating budget for a higher amount, a higher dollar amount. So I think there's where the discussions need to take place as to, how do we successfully put money and dollars away? How much do you allow that to grow? Who's control of that sort of thing. We've got to figure that out.
Mhm.
So we're kind of at a crossroads here. That's where we want to have some discussions with all of you. So to see where, where our next move will be.
Do you guys have any questions?
I
We'll give
like
Peter a
the
chance.
fact that you're reaching out to the Board of Finance. I was obviously in the meeting with you earlier tonight, and I like that kind of thing. The cross-fertilization is wonderful, and I encourage it. I think, even in the report, there's mention of more collaboration between the Board of Ed and the town, and I encourage that at any level, and happy to participate.
Yeah, thank you
I
for
think it's great.
partaking in the admin negotiations.
Whether it's, the maintenance or the contract negotiations or budget management, whatever. I'm
Okay.
certainly encouraging that.
Thanks, Peter.
And I don't have any direct questions, just a commentary. I appreciate your report and working together with the Board of Finance to address these bigger issues that are thorny issues. And just to comment on the redistricting, why can't we just take a magic marker? Take out the map and go like this and say, that's it.
And we have a draft of that
I mean,
nature.
I know,
but-
1,000 years ago when I grew up, I had to go different shifts, different places, never got a chance to take a bus, and whatever they told me I was going, and that was all right.
I know.
We survived.
And we're also discussing, this hasn't been done in like 25 years, I guess, redistricting.
I have
It's
some
definitely
ideas,
time.
like I think that Pond Cliff is 97 West Main leans towards Louis B. Haynes, and maybe that's a center school. You want to take pressure off other schools and shift to center. I don't want to start anything. I don't
No,
know
I mean, it's the
anything.
same thing with Giants
Page
Neck.
for fifth.
Giants Neck goes to
I
Haynes.
just think there's bigger issues out there in the world, and
Yeah.
too bad you have to hire a consultant to,
Well, we're talking about it. I mean, there's just a whole
God.
study that I couldn't even begin to surmise of how they
I'm
look
sure
at, the
board
birth
members are
rates and everything
shaking in
else.
fear, whatever decision it is.
But
So,
it's,
we're talking about that.
But it would be temporary, and I have to echo Beth's concern. It's a shame that we have to pay a consultant to figure this out. I mean, if you're saying that there are funds in your budget, in the capital improvement budget, for the elementary school, that you could use to this, then I would say that that's better off spent somewhere else or returned to the taxpayers. I do think that we should be able to handle this.
Well, that's where we're going back and forth on, but what we're doing is looking at the use of the 37 million that for the school projects, a portion of that, which also potentially could be state reimbursable, too, so we can potentially get money back. So I'm investigating that as well. We've got that meeting next week at the state. That's one of the questions that we're going to ask. So We'll see where it goes, but, you know, this firm also is that organization that stands up in front of parents and gives the whole summary and can have validity behind when a parent asks a question as to the whys. I mean, we can, but, you know, we don't have the skill set to do a full.
Yes, you do.
Yeah.
I'm sorry,
I know.
It's an unbelievable comment in society today where our fear is our consumers are going to be crashing down the door. I mean, I think the biggest thing is moving, with your biggest deadline, I guess, is your bus contracts and rerouting.
That's a big
And I don't know.
Yeah, that drives a lot of it.
It's not anything particular to this case. It's just shocking what I see all over today of this incredible enabling that we're doing
Thank you.
of pretty well-off families.
That's putting it very well.
I'm sorry.
done.
Don't worry,
on
I'm
the
not running
record,
again.
I'll say, Texas is going
And I
back to
don't care, but
paddling
it's so
kids, so
true.
for corporal punishment, we're not doing that, so I just want to make sure that.
No,
that's
I
clear.
think we have to, like, have a whole convening on what is punishment today, if anything, or risk and rewards. Everyone gets an award. Okay.
So we'll keep you apprised. as to-
Okay.
I see you trying to sit down, but I did have.
Oh,
just-
I'm sorry. Sorry.
Easy, Jeff. Get comfy there.
The state's verbal confirmation of their participation in this school project,
For
is
the
that typically sufficient? Is
No,
that-
we need to get a formalized letter from them. We've not gotten that yet. We just got a call, a verbal, and then now we go up and we meet with them and go through all of the documents. They have a few questions. We'll talk about space standards.
So there is still some risk.
I can't say 100% that we're guaranteed the reimbursement component.
Okay. The other issue, with the same question about the redistricting. I mean, in my opinion, whatever you do, there's going to be people that are going to say that's the wrong thing to do. So why pay somebody else to make a wrong choice when we can do that ourselves?
Right.
It just doesn't seem to me like
Hard hats on.
having money aside. Again, there's no harm with underspending your budget. So not spending it, I think, is probably okay. And then you were talking about doing building study or something like that, and is there an opportunity to leverage the town staff? We have, building maintenance people that maybe can help with that, and we don't have to bring in outside contractors.
I like how you're thinking, Bill.
And I don't know where that line is between the budgets and how you can share resources, but I would
Yeah.
think that we've got some pretty smart guys in town.
Oh,
that can-
and they're great, and they've been extremely helpful. I'll give Bill Shear, Joe Bergaw. I know how taxed and busy, they are as well, but it's always something to discuss. I mean, right now, we're working on a sidewalk project, together, and they've been 2 sidewalk projects.
And I've heard more about that sidewalk, geez.
Have you?
It's coming
Hopefully,
along beautifully.
hopefully good. I'm hearing good things.
comments
Oh, it's
about the
beautiful. I looked
sidewalk.
at it the other day. It's
Yeah.
gorgeous.
Yeah.
Has O&G
Yeah.
done something else before? Everybody went, oh, when you said O&G.
O&G has
I
been
think they got a
used
great
previously.
reputation.
Yeah, they've done.
They're all pretty good.
Yeah, they've done over
Yeah.
200 school projects. They've done over 60 elementary
They do
schools.
office moves and
They've done
layouts.
East Lyme work. They did the high
build
school
outs.
back when that was renovated. I believe they did the middle school, the construction of the middle school as well. So, and they've got a good reputation. So I think we're in good hands. I'm confident, and I'm confident in the structure and the layout of the staffing, because again, we have 3 schools under renovations at the same time. So the project manager, the superintendents that are going to be on site, that was an important component of how that's structured.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
That'd be fun.
very
because we,
important.
That'd be a fun project
we
to
can't
do.
run around with our hard hats on. And,
They would forget all about redistricting if that didn't go right.
Absolutely. So we need to make sure that goes right, so, I can keep my job and
Thank you.
forward, so.
So I will echo everybody else's comment about the redistricting issues. Give them a hug. Coaching received.
And
Love
we're trying to stay focused right now on the phasing component, because kids are
Right.
gonna move.
Right, but
Right.
like everybody's
But,
been
yeah.
saying, someone's going to be unhappy,
Somebody's gonna
no
be
matter what you do.
Yep.
It's just
We'll
how it
face
goes.
it. I mean, yeah, absolutely. It's
I just
inevitable.
wonder, is there a different topic? And I know our funding for the project is bonded, so it's not like resources from the state, but are we having a conversation on any level about any impact withholding resources from the state might have on our school projects?
I haven't heard anything.
Is there any impact we need to
I've
think
not
about?
heard- No, I haven't heard anything specific that they would hold, funding for school projects. I think once we're in.
Well, I'm talking more about operation and maintenance as we go forward. I mean, are we,
Budget-wise?
yeah, have we taken our shoes off and sat and shot the breeze with each other about
If-
little chin rubbing, well,
I'm
what?
gonna drive you up to the LOB with me and we'll.
So you're not talking
park
school,
in the
you're talking
parking
the
lot and-
state budget.
Yes,
If we
I'm
have the
saying,
woes of the state
if we get a
budget.
substantial
Yeah.
cut in revenue, are we thinking about, oh my gosh, how can we maintain 3 schools? I mean, I'm just asking if we're thinking about it. I don't know if we are or not, but
Well, I think we're thinking about a lot of things, you know, and.
is that a no?
But
Well,
No, he's got a plan.
as to Lisa's
He's got a plan.
point,
It's-
I'm sure the
it's-
town is coming up with the plan and Board of Ed, because we'll be
That's-
looking at that plan.
Yeah, where
And
cuts
maybe-
would come from,
Yeah.
you know, we've had some initial discussions, where things would freeze. You know, it's just, we need a number is what we need.
No, I get it. I understand.
Yeah.
But so in lieu of the fact that we've been dealt some 2s and 3s here, and we don't have a great hand to play, if we do have to if we do get the shortfall in revenue, have we said, we've thought about it and said, well, okay, we can still manage 3 elementary schools. It's still the right thing to do, given the small overage of kids we have. It's not a huge overage. I know it's what we said, but I'm just saying, have we said, okay, no, we still want to go there, but here,
Yeah.
here is where we would have to make some cuts. It's not over here. Have we asked ourselves those questions?
Yeah, we haven't re-entertained, you know, should we go down to 2 schools
No.
or now? We're looking at other
And
avenues.
it's a totally separate
to save
committed
money.
pot.
Yeah, to
Nothing to
save
do
money.
with the current.
Yeah, we're not going in that direction.
Okay.
There's been no discussion on, you know,
All
on
right.
that to save dollars.
Could you imagine?
All right, thanks.
So, yeah. Yep.
Any other questions for
No.
Jeff? Okay, thank you.
Okay.
So we'll move on to the first selectman and then the finance director, but just so everybody knows where we're at, we'll, after these updates, we
You
will,
want to do the updates after, and I move into executive session to save attorney time, or whatever you feel is appropriate?
My report's very short.
Okay.
and I was going to say, we will take a 5-minute bio break
Okay.
after you make the motion to go into executive session. So if
Okay.
everybody could just hang tight, we'll listen to a few minutes from the first selectman.
I'll segue from what Mr. Newton was talking about. We're patiently waiting for the budget. The governor's taking control of expenditures and spending it in the state, as you know, and that's not a good thing.
Well, I have.
That's
lot
not
to
a
say
good
to
thing.
that.
We don't expect revenue for the town aid roads and local LoSiP projects until this dust settles. He has also given indication as of last week that he plans on taking ECS money from towns like ours and moving it to the cities, which is directly the opposite of what the legislature was looking at. Legislature really, most of the calculations were keeping us whole, maybe a little short. One was actually a little bit heavier. But that's not the case with the governor taking control of it. We received a letter from Ben Barnes, was it? Is that the fellow's name? Yeah, and Anna will get into it, but they're asking what our fund balance is today, what our revenue sources are, what economic impacts would be with the budget, et cetera, et cetera. They're trying to make some decision based on information that we are required to provide them.
If I may interrupt for just a second, are you suggesting that the budget is looking into our fund balance and will use that as a measure in determining
The
ECS?
governor has very clearly said he's looking at town fund balances.
So it would behoove us to
Spend
spend
it.
what we need now.
wouldn't.
No.
No one,
For your records.
no one. I'll let our finance director talk about that. We just went through a bond meeting with Moody's the other day and said the only reason why we're not getting moved down is because we haven't touched our fund balance. And we maintain not a healthy one, but one that is preserved for the right reasons, and we haven't dipped into it. More on that to come. So obviously, you saw the mobile station is we're continuing to test. We found some contaminants. We're trying to determine the best method of cleanup. Of course, we received a state grant for that cleanup, so we're working with the state, since it's their money, on how to clean it up satisfactory to what level, since it will be a park and it won't be a commercial property or residential. And most of these toxins, lead, and some other identified resources, things, have been there for quite a while. Decades and decades. We're talking train station days. The subcommittee, meanwhile, is a park subcommittee. They continue to meet to determine the best use of the space and how we'll pay for it, and then we're coming up to a final design and how we'll use that space as a park and how we'll pay for that. Since you last met, the police transition occurred at 12:01 a.m. on July 1st, 2017, without incident, but with great acknowledgement. The building was full with our president and former police officers and sergeants, and it was a great occasion. They've already proven the efficiencies, their outward reach in our communities, that our chief is doing a remarkable job and getting great feedback from our communities. He's out there meeting people. The press picked up on a story that I've been meeting with the old Lyme first selectman, right? Just to talk, just discussions about what it would be like for Old Lyme and East Lyme to combine to one force. They're on the resident state trooper system, of course. They have a lot of similar demographics and issues. You know, surge in population in the summer. We have beach issues. We have traffic issues. We have 95 that gets shut down, and traffic comes through our two towns on Route 1 and 156. We could better handle that, perhaps. They are in desperate need of better policing, and we are trying to determine what we get out of the deal. And there's a lot that we could get out of the deal, including, well, we'll leave it there. We're discussing that. And it's just a discussion. With that discussion exists a discussion of shared other departments that we could share, resources we could share, vehicles, equipment, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Also facilities, buildings that we could share. We've identified significant opportunities that could be great for both towns, and there'll be more to come on those conversations. And tonight, just a typical night in East Lyme. The town is alive and well. We had a play under the band shell called Blight Spirit. We had the governor's foot guard marching band, but they're set, they don't march. On the beach, we had String of Pearls, which is this big band. They're awesome. At Smarties, and of course we had the fun run that leaves and comes back to Black Sheep. It's a 5K that comes up every Wednesday, and we have people all over town, al fresco dining, and it was just a great summer evening. And we've enjoyed a great summer with great events, successful events, and get nothing but positive feedback.
I just want to make some comments on the budget from what I'm hearing, because I know what you're hearing, and there's all different
Yep.
things spinning around. And I blame both parties, and I'm not politicizing this when I'm saying that one of the problems is the lack of a mini budget. We're leaving someone in charge who has to do a constitutional cut. So anybody that's discretionary funds, and everybody's planning, I know our place is planning for our 10% reduction of the workforce, and that's already being implemented, as well as nonprofits that are always discretionary are closing down. And then you have the towns that are suffering because you're trying to plan for a school year, et cetera, et cetera. And I think, and this is what I'm hoping, and this is just a theory, that in order to get a budget from both sides, and I'm not so worried about the Senate side, because I think they can work some done out. My concern is the House side. How do you get pressure to bear on getting a budget and making it a priority? And I think that this, I'm going to do a shift on the educational cost share. And remember, there's also a lawsuit out there. The formula hasn't been fair to begin with. We know there needs to be an adjustment, blah, blah, blah. I think he's using this to put pressure on the various delegations that haven't been coming to the table or haven't been, everybody needs to give up something.
Yep.
And with this pressure added on, hopefully that will move. Because I am watching it and being up there regularly, there isn't a sense of urgency.
No, there isn't.
And it's like shocking to me. And regardless of party, seeing people that always go, oh, the developmentally disabled, oh, the safety net, are the first ones that are being hit hard.
Yes,
And
they are.
the same ones that they like wrap themselves around and pretend such love is the ones that are hurting the most. And that hasn't done it. So maybe, and this is just a theory, that him saying that and starting to ask for everybody's fund balance will send a message to everybody like, oh shoot, I better get off my butt and really work out something. Because if everybody does it and they're all unhappy, then we know we have a budget. We're not going to get everything we want, but we're the last now in the country.
Yeah.
The last one in the
You sound
country.
No shock
surprised.
at all. They
Well,
started on January 4th.
No, I don't think they know how to share power and get it done. And I think some have and have really stepped up, and some are just shockingly surprised. So I'm hoping that this is a ploy to make them come to the table.
Maybe,
We'll
obviously he's
see.
in charge. Social services are taking it the worst, obviously, but I don't know how Jeff unlocks the door on the first day of school, not knowing if there's going to be a
Exactly.
$2 million ECS cut, or I don't know how he hires teachers. I don't know how
I think you
he
guys
figures
should all
out where
go
to
up
put the
there
kids.
and-
I don't know how that all
I think the
happens.
parents are upset about district. They should all take a bus and go up there. It's better time spent.
They've done that,
And we'll have,
so.
the magic bus will have much more of an impact than anybody else. We have to approve the bus, though. We will approve the bus. I will.
Okay, any further questions for the first selectman? Hearing none, we'll move on to the finance director's report.
Good evening. In your packets, I put updated revenue reports for the month ended June 30th and also for the month ended July 31st. The correspondence that we received from the state were 2 letters. The first letter was from Governor Malloy to Ben Barnes, directing Ben to obtain fund balance information from all the cities and towns so that he could prepare a report for the governor. So what we received states what the fiscal year 15 and 16 fund balances are. He wants us, he's asking that we provide an estimated fiscal year ending 17 fund balance and a fiscal year ending 18, our estimated fund balance based on how we proposed our budgets. In addition, they've asked us to provide any supplemental information about the potential impact that loss of state revenues would have on our community's finances. So they've asked that we provide them this information by the middle of next week.
So who are you working with on that to pull those numbers together?
Well, in terms of the estimated and projected, I will work on that. And the other piece of it, with regards to supplemental information, I have sent a request over to the Board of Education to provide us with any preliminary discussions that they have had. And at this point, we are freezing spending on the town aid road funds. Typically, in the month of August, we would receive half of those funds, of which we've received none. So pending the outcome of the budget, we'll determine. So typically in August, we would receive half of those funds. So we've put a freeze on spending of that. So at this point, that's kind of like a budget neutral item. The other revenue that we did receive last year in the month of August was the revenue sharing funds. We didn't budget for that, so that
It's also
isn't. However, in the month of September, we would typically receive our pilot funds, and that's about $900,000 for us. So at that point, we start running into cash flow issues because we're accustomed to having that revenue. And then, of course, in October, we receive a third of our ECS money. And so that becomes, a different set of cash flow issues. So anyways, and typically.
Are you aware if any payments are being made in October, even at a reduced level, just to keep us operating?
I believe that that's the purpose that,
Gonna be
the communications were sent to cities and towns to come to some sort of a decision on how to move forward.
I'm sorry, and when was the due date for that?
Wednesday of next week.
Can I just make a suggestion when you're talking about community impacts, that really write a strong narrative, Mark and superintendent, about all the quality of life and the hits that what will happen. I know they want numbers, but they're also talking impacts, so impacts can also include narrative, so that it's at least on the record.
Yeah. Good point. I like the impact.
Yeah.
So,
Dismal.
on that note. And then also in your green folders, you had requested information on what we've bonded for roads. And so there's a history of that showing the different amounts going back to, I believe, the 2010, 2011 fiscal year.
I'm
Not sure I see that.
not sure. Oh, I don't. In the green folder.
And so I showed the adopted budget amount and that we've expended all the funds. And the remaining funds for the 16-17 year are encumbered, so there is a plan to spend those funds. And then we've just received the new funds for this year. And then in addition, the Commission on Aging van was ordered April 19th, and we're expecting delivery somewhere at the beginning of October. What typically happens is they give us a call and let us know what the delivery date on the van will be.
Can we go back to the roads? I don't know if you're in a position to speak to the roads or not, Mark.
Mr. McCall will be here later, but
Well, if you are, good. If you're not, I understand. I'm just looking at the 2010-11 road rehab schedule. I don't know if you have it in front
That's
of you.
what this is, yeah.
You see that at 490? And then all the subsequent years are at least double. Is there any step change, bump up, any explanation? You don't, and you may not know.
we didn't have a road rehab program.
Right, I remember
prior to
Mike
this,
G came
so
and spoke
things
about
were
that.
Crumbling
Yeah, And-
underfoot. So this was a ramp up. 490 was just a foot in the door. We've been pretty consistent with the 900,000 figure. There's been a couple of years where we've spiked up because of specific programs, like the one last year. The 1.2 Grassy Hill, I think it was.
Bush Hill.
Nope,
no, that wasn't that.
no, it was Walnut Hill.
Walnut.
Hill. We had to rebuild Walnut Hill from
That
top
was a
to
mess.
bottom, and that
Yeah.
was extra. Joe's got a very good program. You've seen it, you know it,
I
you
know.
understand it.
Yeah, I do. I just, that's a big step up. I just
Well,
didn't know if you had a thought about it.
It was a big step up from zero, the year before, so
Well,
we
I
didn't
don't
have a
imagine it
good
was zero,
program,
but-
so we got there. Joe's pretty confident that his 900 can continue, and it would keep up on our
Yeah,
124
I trust him. He's got a good program.
miles of road, yeah.
I was just trying to understand what that
Why it
step up
bumped.
was, but,
Why it bumped.
yeah. I mean, it is a big change. I didn't know what it was about. It's okay.
There may be a year or two, we just have to get it down to zero and let the roads crumble,
Okay.
Be a bad decision, but.
Of course it would,
Yeah.
so I don't think we're questioning that.
Yeah, well, no, of course I'm not. Any concerns you want to bring to our attention over and beyond the level, the baseline level of concerns?
Well, the state budget, yeah.
Yeah. Anything additional we should know about?
Not at this point.
All right, thanks.
Anybody have any questions for Anna?
If I can actually back up to Mr. First Selectman, was there something that motivated you to enter this other letter into our package to talk about meeting times and appropriate performance to town hall meetings? Was there some,
Mark, right
oh,
here.
you put this in there?
10 o'clock curfew, that one.
Yeah, I put that.
That's
in.
part of it, but yeah, I just didn't know if
We
there's
just have a lot of
been,
meetings going over, and that every time we dip into it, it's overtime. And I'm not sure people realize that. I don't think other commissions realize that when they go to 11:30, 12 o'clock, we had one go to 1:30, that, that's all overtime hours. And we don't have a budget for that.
so is it appropriate if the meetings run long to cancel part of the agenda?
You can do that. Or you can start your meetings earlier if you have a very, very hefty agenda. And that's happening. We had wetlands start at 6 one night instead of 7 because they had to close out a meeting. And that was a wise decision.
So I think, I for one fully support this idea because I'm not one to incur additional overtime if we can avoid it. But
Right.
that being said, I don't want this board to feel like we have to rush through any decision without getting all of our questions answered. So another option would be to schedule a special meeting If there's something important on the agenda that we just can't
Or
get
maybe
to,
switch the order, like put,
Well, content is content. If you
I
have to
know,
get
but-
through it all.
put
But
the
if it's a-
reports below and put new business up towards top, and then whatever motions needed to be made, or deferred, or more information are addressed right away, not at the end of the night, and then we don't get to them. So, like, new business can go on top, reports can go on that, but that's the way I.
So now you have two very, very lengthy reports.
Yeah.
You have this auditor report that lasted an hour and 10 minutes.
which
and
it
then-
always does.
And,
And then
yeah,
we have an
right,
executive
and we
session.
knew that, and then,
Mhm.
of course, we're eventually gonna get to executive session, and then eventually, I have department heads coming back, and of course, they start their day at 7, so, to address the, special appropriation. So, special meetings may be the right way to go when we're having, specific, long discussions. Just a suggestion, I'm not asking you to do more work, but maybe just spread it out so it's more
What
appropriate
was your
to,
comment, Bill?
Well,
to our budget
my
and
initial
schedule.
question was this motivated by the excessive overtime or to try to
It's overtime.
curtail overtime? And is it appropriate, if the meeting appears to be running long, to just table some of the agenda items and hold a special meeting or defer them
I
till?
don't know if we're starting a half
Next
an hour
week.
earlier.
Right,
On the big ones, yeah,
Oh, all of them.
Okay.
all of them.
How
That's all.
about,
thank you.
can I ask you about item 4?
Yeah.
I'm particularly interested in item 4. I'd be happy to be relieved of duty. Should I be?
What's item 4? Oh,
The video equipment?
Is that what this is?
Yes.
That, the projector.
Oh, so it's not this, the DVD recording?
Ability to use a projector that's permanently installed in the ceiling. However, only trained town employees are allowed to operate the conference room audio and video equipment.
Oh, you are off the hook.
Yes.
Well,
Well,
I'm
whatever.
speaking mostly to that, and you're stuck with that.
Yeah.
Oh.
Isn't it-
Or you
you
can
see
move it
the
down to
footnote
Bill,
on the
or
bottom?
wait till the next
No,
election. and
I
take
was
the
kidding a
low
little
man
bit,
on
but truly, if you feel that better trained people should operate it, I'm not gonna be
it.
wounded.
Town employees don't do it, so.
Okay, so I'm still being
Yes.
asked, or one of us
Yeah.
are still being asked to maintain
So
this.
But other
To
other
operate this.
commissions, sorry, they take their junior person. So sometimes that screen sits over where that person might not have a lot of papers going.
All right.
And then
Um,
sometimes we have somebody from the high school
Yeah,
coming
I
in
don't,
and
I don't mind
audio.
doing it, I just wondering if there was some alternate direction being given. I
You're
didn't-
doing a great job, Lisa. Keep up the good
Eh,
work.
Of course I am. You're welcome to do it, Mark.
That's how you get the.
I'm
do
sure
it.
you could do a better
I've
job
done
than
it.
me.
No.
Okay, I'm
Okay.
gonna make a motion, a move for the Board of Finance to enter an executive session at 8:50 PM for the purpose of discussing litigation and to invite Attorney Shell Myers, First Selectman Mark Nickerson, Board of Education Superintendent Jeff Newton, Finance Director Anna Johnson, and Board of Ed Finance Director Mariana Stevens to attend as appropriate.
I'll second that. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Yes. Just a reminder that in executive session, no note-taking.
Right.
Mics are on.
Okay, we're out of executive session and no action was taken.
Okay,
We don't have that.
that was
We don't
recorded.
have.
Just to repeat, Karen, we've exited executive session and took no action.
Same people made the motion?
Yes.
Yes.
What was the time?
9:50 to
I have the
9:33.
8:50.
Yeah, 8:50 to 9.
Motion carried.
Okay.
Joe's on his way.
He's right here.
He just went downstairs to get something.
He's right here.
Okay, Joe,
It's
Joe,
Joe's twin.
we're ready for you, Joe, to talk about the boiler replacement.
This one.
How dare you?
Thank you for having me. So I'm sure the first question that I want to answer, because it'll be the first, is why was this not in the budget process?
Why?
So I want to answer it. I have ESP. So, I didn't find out about this till mid-April. At the time, I just heard that we have 5 boilers, and then one that circulates around the whole perimeter. At the time, mid-April, it went down. It was the end of the season. We had no indication to the winter there was anything wrong. Building's 25 years old, and obviously, you know, that's why we set aside the $37,000 every year for HVAC repairs. So, of course, I don't want to come in from a board or coming from Anna or Martin Nickerson without having some numbers. So you see in the quotes, the first, New England Mechanical is the contractor that we work with. They do all the PMs for all the stuff. They came back in early May. It was like $98,000. I'm like, you know, so instead of coming to this board again, try to get two other bids, reputable firms. So reached out to Dunkley. They're out of Stonington, and also Bartol. The reason why I went to those, Dunkley has done a lot of work with, even though it makes all the sense in the world to use New England Mechanical, who already services our stuff, to do the big work, our experience has been that they don't give the best price because they're a bigger outfit, bigger overhead, stuff like that. They serve the purpose of what they do because no one can service us. They have all kinds of crews and stuff like that, and you know, you snap the finger, they're there in an hour and a half, and there's not a lot of outfits that do that. They're experts in control work and stuff like that. So on Board of Ed, Jeff's here, the Board of Ed uses New England Mechanical. But I was asked just to also let you know, and the Board of Selectmen was kind of asking a lot of questions about why aren't we using New England Mechanical, and why is there such a disparity in things. So that's probably another question. Why are they, you know, is Dunkley 78, New England Mechanical's 98, and then Bartol. So just a few other things. I know you've been here a while, but so New England Mechanical, Dunkley has done air handler about a year and a half ago in the PD. It was we had money in that HVAC account, so I didn't come in front of this board. That's what that account's for. We also had a $17,000 air handler go down in the big community room where we vote, where the voting is, the community center. That's again what that money's there for. So Dunkley's done that work, and they're very reputable. Bartol just did the work at the Judge of Probates over here, another reputable firm that they're out in New London. They do a lot of stuff. New England Mechanical is really a commercial and industrial. They're the big boys. Dunkley's kind of mid-range, and Bartol's somewhat residential and commercial. The reason why Bartol's numbers, Dunkley number and Bartol's numbers are apples and apples. Bartol actually didn't want to even quote that. They wanted to quote something else. So they quoted something of higher magnitude, and that's why their number's 115. So that's why you're seeing disparity of 78 to 115. The 115 is really not necessary. They would not give us a number based on what. So New England Mechanical gave us of what needed to be done. We went to Dunkley. They kind of gave us something else, which you don't have here. And then we basically said, you're not comparing apples and apples. So when I sit in front of the Board of Finance and tell them that I have a job here, it has to be comparing like stuff. So I get it. That's why we're here. So you have now before you 3 prices, Dunkley, New England Mechanical, and Bartol. So just so we know, there's 5 boilers there, 3 of them are down. The heat, if it was today and you had to turn down, the heat would not work at the community center. So time is of the essence to get this done. And I was really pushing to get the prices, but sometimes it takes a little bit to do it. The positive is it just kind of dropped from the sky, but right as this happened, I got, it's in your package, from Eversource, there was a program that if you met all these different things, this one right here, you can get up to 50% of your cost. So again, trying to work through May, June, July, and now we're sitting in August, trying to get Eversource to give me numbers of what this was going to be took a little bit. So when I put the package together about a month ago, 3 weeks ago for the Board of Selectmen, it was still all, and it's winding down now where it's looking like we very well could be eligible for the 50%. So I don't know this yet. I do need to move forward with this project. In this package that we're proposing here, it's the financing of this is using some money that we carried over from last 16-17, which I'll explain why. There's also the $13,800 is for rebates. It's looking like that could be more, but I don't know at this time, and we have to get this thing going. So any more that we get in rebate is just going to save the town money that we don't have to dip into the capital for other things. And then the third part of the financing this was the taking money from what it was meant to be. That every year we try to put together the $37,000. The last 2 years, so 15, 16, that 37 got dropped to 10. Or 16, 17, now 17, 18, 37 got dropped to 10. So that money is actually starting to get depleted. But we do have that 28,000 in that account. So the last thing I want to mention is why do I have $37,000 left over in the account? That was kind of the fuel we did. We looked around and priced around the fuel costs, and we only paid $1.60 for number 2 fuel, where a lot of other places were paying $2 and stuff like that. So we did really well on fuel last year. We changed the community center from number 2 fuel to natural gas, and that happened last year, so a year and a half ago. But at the time we were putting that budget together, we still didn't have a full year of knowing the magnitude, what we were going to save, and we're doing very well at the community center. And also, when we went to natural gas, we pulled the underground storage tank out of the community center, and it had 6,000 gallons in it. And because we were not with like East River, one of these companies up in the middle of the state that really doesn't care about us, we were using Guy's oil right down here. He basically just took the fuel and gave us a credit for it. So then whenever we needed it all winter long, he kept putting his fuel in our tanks for nothing. And there's not a lot of business that will do that. So kudos to Dick Gator for doing that. It's 6,000 gallons of free fuel that was sitting in a tank that was just redistributed to other buildings times, typically it's around $2. There's about 12,000 right there. So we did really well in that account. The 37,000 was not all from the heating account. I took monies from other accounts, the building maintenance and stuff like that, transferred them into the heating account. So what we could do, because I knew come April and May, when I knew that even though I didn't know the exact numbers, when New England Mechanicals told me it's going to be $98,000, I know that I'm going to be paying something. So I better start squirreling away as much money as I can to come in front of this board to use that money that was already appropriated. So now we're sitting at trying to use last year's money that was already appropriated. It looks like we're going to get 50% for a rebate from Eversource, so we can pay for all this new work at the community center and really not appropriating any additional money that we didn't already have. So I think it's a win-win, but the problem is we have to move on this thing, because if we go, Board of Selectmen approved last week, if the Board of Finance, that's obviously your call, and then the town meetings next week, the next day I have to order this equipment, because it's going to be 3-4 weeks lead time. And even though it was really warm today, it could be cold at some point soon. I've been told by these contractors it should all be in by September, which it is the senior center and the library and all this stuff. I need to make sure that come later in September, I have heat for that building. So that's my story. That's what you have here. I hope I answered as much of all the questions you might have asked, but if you have others, certainly.
I'm going to start, I was going to say I'm going to start at this end.
I
with
love the
questions.
fact that you came in with the answers.
Well,
That's great.
grilled is not the right word, and it's all good stuff, but the Board of Selectmen had a lot of good questions last week. I should say one other thing is they read, as boards do, and did due diligence, and they were reading the Dunkley quotes and the New England Mechanicals, and it didn't. I actually got Dunkley to revise their quotes. You don't have this, but to show that it has a 1-year warranty and shows that it's the exact same equipment as New England Mechanical. So it was like the Board of Selectmen was a little concerned that, the 78 wasn't really reflecting what the 98 was.
Right. So, no, it was a great presentation.
All right, good.
And it looks to me like you did all your homework and you found how to piece it together, and it was an issue that was emergent and couldn't be contemplated at the time that the budget was created, and you found a way to work your numbers and make it happen, so I don't have a problem. You did a great job in presenting.
Thank you.
Quick question for clarification. So there's 5 boilers at the community center. This figure will replace 3 of those 5.
The 5 will now become 3.
Oh, okay, so
It-
more
it-
capacity with less equipment.
Higher efficient equipment, more capacity.
So we'll be in a good position. Everything will be new.
Everything will be-
start
everything in
with a
that room
new
will be new.
life. And what is the life of these units?
I would say 25 years, because that's what we're at the community center, and those are original boilers that just failed, so they should be 25 years. So it's going to be all new equipment in that room.
And you feel comfortable that this is a smaller outfit, the Dunkley, that they'll be able to service us 24/7 if we have something go wrong?
Yes. They will service the boiler work, and then, once it gets out of the warranty period, it will revert back to New England Mechanical. We've already told New England Mechanical, we would like to use you. If you don't give us the lowest price, we have to use them. But you realize that once this kicks back in, they're also going to give me a credit for the year that it's under warranty for the boiler work that Dunkley is responsible for. Because right now, we have a contract with New England Mechanical. For
And
this year.
we prepaid for
No, we don't pay.
service?
We pay quarterly.
So they're going to give us credit for what then?
They're gonna, as this year, it's a quarterly thing, so over the next year, when New England Mechanical, Dunkley has a warranty, a 1-year warranty on this, any costs that they allocated to the boilers, which are now gonna be new, they will credit us because they're new boilers.
Because they have the union, they contract for the whole town, not
They-
just for the community center.
They contract all the buildings that, the town government, not Board of Ed uses them as well, but they have a contract for the police department, they have a contract for the town hall. Every building has a separate number. And the number for the for community center is actually a pretty big number, because you have like 45 heat pumps, you got all the boilers, you got you got the cooling tower out back. And the way our contract is, if anything breaks, you have to fix it unless it's a devastating failure. So they gamble every year of how much it's going to cost to that contract, because I'm going to tell them, if it breaks, you fix it as part of your contract. So they're going to give us a credit. They don't know exactly, they're going to tell me, but everything's kind of in the flux of trying to get that number. But I did go back to them as something that the Board of Selectmen asked it, and we're going to get a credit from New England Mechanical for not having to service boilers that are brand new.
But it makes their future risk go down, because now they're
Correct.
maintaining newer equipment too. So that's a
So that
win
number
for them.
should go down.
Yeah.
Any other questions?
Yeah, so as I was looking at the financials for the 6/30/17 year-end period, it looks like a lot of these accounts were zeroed out already. So have these transfers already been made?
They were previously made.
They were previously made, okay. So we can talk about that when we, at another point, but I would like to say also, I think good work. This is just exactly like what we want to see, multiple bids, not always the best quote, because you do have to match apples to apples.
Correct.
In this case, it looks like the best quote is, the lowest quote is the best quote, and we're going with that. I just say, great job. And thank you for cobbling together the funds so
Yeah.
that we don't have to hit the current year's budget on this project.
The only reason thank you, the only reason I was trying to get any money in those accounts is only for this very reason. I knew that we were gonna have to allocate as much money as we could, so I wasn't trying to put money in there, it was to pay for this. This is the very reason, so that I wasn't asking the town for any extra money, because right now, it's already appropriated money and rebate money,
Mm-hmm,
and that's what we should be doing.
mm-hmm. Understood. Thank you.
Couple questions, Joe.
Sure.
So We do regular inspections on all of our facilities equipment, right?
Correct.
Okay. So
Preventative maintenance, yes.
what, I'm a little surprised that this was such a surprise. Help me with that.
New England Mechanical was a little surprised as well. I mean, so when you say inspections, we have that preventative maintenance contract. It's not that New England Mechanical doesn't show up when it's broken. They come twice a year, I believe twice.
Yeah,
3
preventive.
times, and the boilers. They did not, this was unexpected to them, that they were gonna have these failures.
Uh-huh. Do we have a long-term facilities plan for the town? Not Board of Ed, that's a different issue, which we're
For all
working on.
facilities?
For everything. You know, something that says, here's all the big electrical work, here's all the HVAC work, here's all the major pumps, all kinds of big stuff with the age they're at, where we can have some kind of idea, you know, laid out over time. I want you to nod with me so you see my vision here.
No, I see your vision.
Because then, right, when something's coming up on a 25 years, or we can say, oh, we're vulnerable here. Not, we're just, right now, we're throwing some money in a bucket in the capital plan for HVAC failures or what have you, which is great. But we're not looking at where we are vulnerable over time, where we could have a couple of things bundled up that could fail. So I think this is good. I think we could probably get a little better and foresee some of these major failures. Do you agree?
Yes, you're correct.
All right.
We
Is
do
it-
not, we do not have a plan like that on the facility, on the buildings.
Yeah.
I'd like to have one.
Would you consider looking at, like,
I-
Waterford and Essex? I don't care where you
I
look.
can look at that. I know exactly what you need. I mean, I can look what other towns, but it's pretty self-explanatory
Right.
what you need. You need to look at the buildings and go over the parts. I'm not sure
Big,
what.
big stuff. I'm
I-
not looking at every little
Well,
bolt, but I'm talking big expenditures.
Well, here's one right here, the cooling tower. We've been putting buckets of money for the last few years because that is a big, we got a heads up a few years ago that thing isn't gonna last. I know you're looking on a grander scale.
Yeah, I'm talking
But that's
about-
probably the biggest piece of equipment we got
Yeah.
floating around.
So you would be willing to look at some other towns or to prepare something
yes.
time-scaled kind of thing, over time, looking in quarters, right? Like, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Like something here with all the major disciplines down the page, because Jeff's going to give us something like this in a couple of months, aren't you?
Just working on that.
Right. And it's going to have, I'm looking for something with, like, big stuff. HVAC, electrical, the pool, whatever we got to do to maintain the town.
Well, you said the pool, that's Jeff.
Whatever. All right, that's Jeff. You're right, coaching
So,
receive.
are we taking over the
No,
pool?
I got you. I'm with you.
I
But
never
then,
touched it.
then you put the age on these big pieces of equipment, and then we say, oh, God, look at this. In April of 19, we're pretty vulnerable here. We have a boiler going that's going to be 23 years old here, and then in parallel with that whole thing, we're doing some kind of inspections. Yes, we're going to have surprises, but it will help us, because we kind of got lucky here with an Eversource money adding, right? They gave us money towards this, which was great. This is all good. I'm just a little surprised that we didn't know this was going to go, and then I'm thinking, do we learn from this and then project forward where we're vulnerable with some of our bigger equipment? So I think that's something that you'd want to take on, and I'd love to see that. Can you do that in a couple of months?
Yeah.
All right, so would the October meeting be reasonable to pull that together? Or is that too soon? I don't want to make
November
it,
would be better.
November's better. All right,
October's
you got it,
coming up
November.
very quickly.
Great. Anna, could you put that on our November agenda? And my last question is, did we come out and ask New England Mechanical to drop their bid?
Yes, I did.
We did, and they said no.
Yes.
Okay, great, thank
They
you.
gave me a long
I
list of
I
reasons
don't
why
care
they
about the
couldn't
reason,
match
I
it.
just want to know what their answer was. So they said no.
They said no.
Okay, thanks. So I have,
The
you got
new,
anything?
the new boilers are just gas or dual gas oil?
They're natural gas.
Just
They're not
gas.
dual, they're natural gas. We have a contract that went, since we switched over to natural gas. I'd have to look at how long, just like it's gonna be similar to what you guys are hooking over the planners. I think. They don't, by putting in the gas line, there's a certain amount of time you have to stay at gas.
And you're replacing 5 boilers with 3 boilers?
Correct.
And you're only replacing the boilers? You're not doing anything with the controls, the
No,
air
no,
handlers,
question.
the controls are all new. We actually put new controls in. If you recall, we did an energy efficiency, when we did the natural gas, we changed out the whole building management system, so all the controls are new.
It just seemed odd that 5 boilers would fail at the same time.
Well, 3 of them did, but yeah, it was, there's 2 that are working,
That was
but
my point.
it is surprising, and I was surprised. And
I'm shocked.
even though they are 25 years old, there was no indication that they were going and then they went.
Okay. No, good.
It was nice to have a facilities plan. This is great.
Yeah, I mean, it's not any different than what we do with the roads and everything else. We just know
Right.
that we're gonna have
Yeah.
expenses over
Right,
the course
so-
of the year.
But
We're
you can
just
better plan.
kinda-
But so the caveat there, and the only downfall is that if we get into a situation where, well, we've got to replace it because it's come up on the plan, we don't want to start replacing things if it doesn't need to be replaced.
Well, no, but you can see, you can look and do,
Yeah.
sometimes you do preemptive work, but you can also predict where you're gonna be vulnerable. And be ready with contingency plans.
Mhm.
I mean, one thing I was worried about is that the last 2 years that the 37th, just when all our equipment is getting older, and the town was smart to put the 37,000 in, we had to cut it, and I know it was a recommended cut, but it was that or people. So, you know, do I cut a person that does stuff, or do I cut money that we're putting in a bucket? So unfortunately, it makes our bucket of money not as
Robust.
not as full.
Understand?
Robust is a better word.
All right, you ready?
Yeah. Do I have a motion?
I will move to approve a carryover in the amount of $37,042 in the account 01-01-113-400-213, heating oil/propane from fiscal year 2016-17 to fiscal year 2017-18, in order to purchase replacement heating equipment in the East Lyme Community Center, which is in the best interest of the town of East Lyme. Move to approve a special appropriation in the amount of $76,854 for the purchase and installation of a boiler replacement at East Lyme Community Center, being in the best interest of the town of East Lyme. Sources of funding will be as follows: $37,042 in account 01-01-113-400-213, heating oil propane; $27,974 in account 32-70-300-500-005, HVAC pump replacement townwide; $13,800 Eversource incentive to replace heating equipment. This will require a town meeting.
I'll second
So-
that.
So can we do that? Can we take the 13,800 from Eversource? We don't know
Yes.
that we have that yet, or we do know that
That's
we
a
have that?
floor, that's a floor for the rebate. It will probably be more, but that will be a floor. So we can do that because we've been told that we'll have at least 13,800.
Okay, thank you.
You seconded, right?
Yes, we have a second. Any further discussion? If none, we'll take a vote. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Okay, motion carries 5-0.
Thank you.
Thanks,
you.
Joe.
Okay. Next up on the list, authorized audit for June 30th, 2017. I'll make a motion to authorize the audit of June
Well,
30th,
To
2017.
retain, you know, the services of the auditor, RSM.
To retain the services for the upcoming year
Correct.
at the same rate that we negotiated?
That's correct.
Yes.
I'll second that.
Okay. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Motion carries 5-0.
The van.
Moving on to old business, special appropriation, 31,855 for the van.
My assistant superintendent was at the last meeting and brought forward some information in relation to a special education, the need to replace a special education van. It's a 2000 Astro van. We had 76,000, almost 77,000 miles on it, to transport students. I won't rehash probably what she told you. 17 years old, almost 18 years old. It's time for a replacement. You had asked us to go back and research some different options. I think you'd received some information. We looked at Gov Deals. We looked at First Student. The issue we were running into was that 2005, 2006 range, but very high mileage for some of the passenger vans that we found. In Gov Deals, there weren't any vans, at the time. We also looked at Crest Ford. They had a 12-passenger van. And the idea of maybe a 12-passenger van, but I think you need a different.
Well, and
You may.
so when I spoke with Dave, he said that typically the auctions he goes to, there are 12 passenger vans purchase one of those vans without authorization from us. And we don't necessarily need a 12-passenger van. We need more of the 10-passenger van. And he said the cost ranges from 20 to 25,000, and with 50,000 miles on it, so you're already close to the end of the warranty. We're asked for another 5,000 to 6,000. You can purchase a vehicle with a warranty.
I think there might be a different endorsement too for a 12-passenger van for our staff that utilize them versus the 8 to 10. That's why we have prefaced the 8 to 10.
A different endorsement, you mean insurance premium?
I-
or-
On your driver's
Yeah,
license.
DLB driver's
Oh.
license endorsement, yeah.
Yeah.
So, so yeah, for, for the $5,000 or $6,000 more, we're looking at the 31.8. It just, I think it's more prudent to start off with a new van with a warranty, obviously extended warranty. That's going to last us, a number of years. We got 17 out of the previous one, which I think is great, but safety is a concern with that.
So this makes sense to me. I wish that we had this information last month.
I like the honor of Peter making the motion.
One more question, though. I think the other thing that we asked was there a salvage value of the existing van?
I didn't realize that.
What are the
I can
plans?
certainly look into that,
It's
certainly,
not
there
worth
may be,
it.
but it's 17 years old, so I'm
Mhm.
not sure.
Having bought and sold 4 cars in the last year, that van's not worth.
Yeah, well,
But-
except that we're hearing that, a used van with 50,000 miles has a worth of $25,000, so it's
Right.
gotta be worth something.
The vans that you see listed there, I did receive, just for the heck of it, I did email her and say, what would the cost be? And I think it was, I think her quote was 2,000 or best offer. So they would be, so, to answer your question, I'm not sure, but certainly I can.
Maybe 1,000.
Certainly you'll do that, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
1,000.
Yeah.
Thousands of thousands, right?
Yeah.
That could
Yeah.
pay for the $500 for the vehicle signage.
Yeah, so when we talked about this for town vehicles in the past, the town had a procedure where they surplus vehicles when they were done using them.
They do go to salvage.
Right, they have a process
They
that
get
they
some
dispose them through and
money.
they get whatever value they can
Yeah.
for them. I thought we
Yeah.
talked about that in the past.
Yeah, but there's
Yeah.
never been any closure to that, though.
Yeah, I don't know that we get documentation of that, and that might be what we want to do, is start seeing some of that in the financial statements, whatever month it is that we sell them, or whatever quarter it is we sell them.
Yeah.
But I think we've talked about in
That'd
the
be good.
past that that the town has
Yeah,
a
I'm
process
sure
where
they always did it in the past, thinking of Chuck Holyfield.
Yep, yep.
It was great.
Okay, I'm ready for a motion.
Move to approve a special appropriation in the amount of $31,855 from the CNRE Fund 32 to account 32-99-400-700-701, Motor Vehicles. These funds are available from the wear and rental fees. This purchase is consistent with the capital improvement plan.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
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 Motion carries 5-0. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Okay. All right.
Budget transfers.
Budget transfers with departments, 120,867.
I can't find anything tonight.
Oh, no, this-
It
So,
was
It's in your-
Anna,
it's
I
in
think
last
you
week's
had
package.
given us
Oh, last
another
week?
schedule, but
Or
it was
last
exactly
meeting's.
the same as the prior schedule that you sent out.
In
From what
the
I could see, there
the
was
June
no,
agenda that we didn't, was it July that we didn't meet, I think?
Yeah.
Right.
So
So
that
this
had
is in
all it goes back to June.
Okay.
And this would
Oh,
help you
got
close
it.
the books this year, right?
you know, Beth, I think you're,
Well, I want
Wait,
to, I want to finish it
I know,
tonight.
but I think you're making a point that's not really valid because, we're only 2 months into the end of the year. This is not holding up the closing of the books. The fact,
No, but I
especially
like that.
since the
I'm
money,
afraid we're gonna say we're tired, it's 10, and now we know have to be out of here, that's all, and I don't want it to go into,
but again, this is what I'm saying. It's like we can choose to go beyond 10,
I think we can.
or we can
Can't we,
choose to
Patty?
have a special meeting because
No.
I'm not going to be rushed through.
Do you want to put it on next month? Put it on next month. Well, I'm asking Camille what she wants to do.
Well, it's not
Well,
just up
board
to me.
decision,
It's
that's
not just
fine.
up to me. It is 10 o'clock. How does everybody feel about that?
What's the implications
Do
of
you
not
have,
deciding?
do you have, you don't, you didn't bring the list with you? Is that what it is?
We have it, it's just 10 o'clock.
You can't
So we
find
don't
it
wanna,
with the mass of paper.
what's the implications of not acting on this tonight?
Can we poll the board?
I'd like to go forward. I don't wanna put the board of, the finance director in a, but, you know, I'll do whatever the majority wants, but I do wanna vote, or at least want to, everyone to weigh in, make a decision, one way or the other, I don't care. And I don't wanna put the, finance director to be deciding that for us.
Well, in my mind, I don't see the harm in postponing it because it sounds like the money has already been moved. Would you say that's correct, Anna?
It has been moved, yes.
It has been moved. What they're looking for from us is a stamp of approval.
I still like to get it done tonight, just for the formality of doing it, if it's on the agenda, because it's been 3 months.
Right.
And, but
So
if it's.
do you have questions on anything, any
No,
individual?
because to me, transfers are within the existing budget as they were. It's usually department head run and controlled and managed. It's not, it's taken from one bucket within a department and putting it in another bucket.
We were presented with the
No, I
same
know,
information,
yeah.
we were presented with two, but facts have changed. Additional, like if you look at, from the Public Works Department, the overtime in the highway, the premise was to move $5,700 because additional funds were needed in overtime due to the transfer station not being able to negotiate change with UPSU.
Mm-hmm.
So I know that we have settled with UPSU. Does that have only to do with the current fiscal year and not the prior fiscal year? Is that number still valid, for example?
Oh, yes, because, we did not implement the change to the transfer hours until after July 1st, 2017. We actually implemented it beginning the week after the 4th of July. So we let the 4th of July week go by with the old schedule, and then after the holiday, we implemented the new schedule. So when we adopted the budget for 6/30/17, we were we were we were gung-ho to get the contract resolved and have that in place. Well, it didn't come to fruition that way. However, we were able to manage getting the contract resolved by the end of last fiscal year so that we could implement that in this fiscal year.
So that is an example of one type of question I have. Other questions that I have are, considering how dire our circumstances are, do we need to move funds to provide one department with services or materials that weren't even anticipated? Are we spending, are we using the use it or lose it mentality here by just doing this?
No, because
Or should we say,
this is a prior budget year, it's not the new budget year. It's money that is in an existing budget that's asking to be put in the right bucket, wherever bucket was deficient during the year. If for some reason
There
that
wasn't a
that
bu- so-
estimate's off, that money would return to the general fund. I
Right.
think it's putting form over substance, and I think it's, to me, it's, and I'm not, I mean, to me, it's not increasing, it's not taking, it's not adding, it's just what already exists in the prior budget year.
if we could save money from one bucket and there wasn't anything in a budget in another line
Right.
item, are we just transferring it to use it so we don't lose it, or should we return it to the people? That's my question. And I think that,
I think that's answered anyway, because if for some reason that, say they're asking for 20,000 to go into another bucket, because at that point in time, there's absolutely no money, but there's all this money in pencils, and they needed to make it the salary line or the overtime line. If that amount that they're talking about was overestimate, in other words, there was a balance left on any of these buckets, it goes into the general fund. like it does every year, and then either goes into fund balance or whatever. It's not gonna be escaped, there's no way out. So if they don't spend those donuts, or if they haven't spent them, the money still gets recaptured. So I'm not worried that it's gonna be diverted anywhere else, because it has nowhere else to go.
Can I
Right?
ask a question?
Maybe
Sure.
I'm missing it, I don't know. I'm not
Is-
saying it right.
This is all balancing last year's budget for departments or accounts that had shortfalls, and departments and accounts that had surpluses. You took the pluses and the minuses and try to offset any shortfalls with departments that had surpluses. And at
It's
the end of the budget
interdepartment.
system, at the beginning of this year's budget system, you took that total and you presented it to us as the surplus for the town at the macro level. So this is micro level management of the macro budget.
This is an interdepartment transfer.
That would be
Department
correct,
one
yeah.
Okay.
In the-
So this doesn't impact the town budget, this is housekeeping, this was all done in the past, this has already been done. If we said no to something in here, can you undo it?
Well, that would be difficult, since
We'll be
when
spending
funds
hours
were
with the auditor
transferred
explaining to him why.
from one line item within a department to another line item, it would have been because it was needed.
So to me, my view of this whole thing is staff and management is managing the budget and trying to reallocate the budget the way it is. This is housekeeping. The total of this whole exercise came to us in the budget books. So it sounds to me like this is all actions that we've already approved when we approved this year's budget, because part of this
No.
year's budget was the impact of the surplus from last year's budget.
These are end-of-year items that are always done.
That's
Right?
Well, I
At-
think
At the
I'm-
macro level, when this whole Tetris game was done, you ended up with some line item surplus value, and you gave that to us in this year's budget.
This is for the budget that ended June 30th, 2017, and so it was for operations that occurred during the fiscal year.
Right.
And 'cause I'm just wondering, I'm a little confused when you say that we put it in the 17-18 budget.
In our 17-18 budget, isn't there a line item for the previous year surplus or deficit? Isn't
That
that one
gets
of the line
returned
items
to
in
the
budget?
general
Yes,
fund, and
yes.
he's looking for the number that gets returned to the general fund.
So what you're looking for is in projected revenues, the
Mhm.
675,000 that we use?
Right, so don't these numbers
This isn't
kind of
revenue.
contribute to that value?
This isn't revenue.
Well, I
No.
think, in a manner of speaking, the way that we have
That's not
fund
used.
balance is the ongoing result of year-to-year operations.
So if there's any surplus at the end of the year, whatever that number may be, $1.50, that's what you see when you go into your next budget cycle, if there was any surplus. And I guess the policy was if you have 675, and I think we built that in already in the new budget,
Correct.
and then whatever is excess to that rolls into the fund balance to be used for, well, look what happened tonight.
Well,
So, that's kind of where I look at this whole thing, is that this
It's
is
not
all
going anywhere.
done, we don't have an impact, or we can't, I don't think, change the results.
well, we can, one. And number two, I'm being asked as a member of this board to approve a transfer that I don't understand how the numbers were determined. For example, I understand where you're coming from, but you're asking me to put a stamp of approval on numbers that I'm not sure that I understand where they're coming from. How can you ask me to appropriate, for
Transfer,
instance?
not appropriate, appropriate.
Transfer. Thank you,
Taking money
Beth.
from a whole different bucket.
So how can you ask me to transfer $15,000 from the health and dental account to the pension account for GG and miscellaneous? $15,000 transfer request, when I last looked at this, there was only $10,715 in there. So don't I deserve some kind of an explanation before I rubber stamp this?
Well, sure, but I like to do it tonight. Because
Can I just say one
Please.
thing? Okay, so the motion that is before you is to ratify the transfers. because they've already been done. And then the other thing is, I understand what you're saying, like, okay, the last time I looked at the budget document that I received, there was only $10,000 left, so I don't understand how a $15,000 transfer could be made. But if you look at the dates that they were made, so this transfer was actually made back in March. So you're
There was
seeing,
more in the bucket.
so at that point in time, you know, the funds were available. Because you're more than likely looking at the last, you know, June 30th report, so that's in
Yes,
June.
I was.
So these transfers occurred earlier in the fiscal year.
So this all goes back to, I have no idea how to keep track of anything. If we're not making transfers in the month that we're saying that we're doing it, there is no way for me to keep track of, you know, if a transfer even makes sense.
Okay,
to me, you always
okay, I
make sense.
understand.
Yeah.
And
shortage.
is this part of the discussion that the auditor is concerned about with the weakness in controls?
I don't think so.
I don't
think at all
think
that's what he
so,
was saying.
no.
No, but you make a good point. It's hard to understand it if they're snapping the chalk at different times. I think that's a valid point. And to be honest, I kind of feel like there's no point to us even looking at it if it's already happened. It's water under the bridge. I kind of want to understand, if we move $15,000 out of pension,
No, it wasn't out of pension,
Oh.
it was into pension.
oh, I'm sorry, I have it backwards. From health and dental to pension. I don't want to micromanage the micromanagement. I'm trying to
Why
understand the
not?
process.
As I understand it, there were surpluses in this column that were moved to
Oh,
this
no.
column.
Right, but my
No,
question is,
Not surplus.
so would you agree that there's money, according to this report, I don't care what date it is, $15,000 was, I'm gonna say, not spent or extra in health and dental, and we had a deficiency in pension. So we said, let's just grab it here and use it here, it's the same department, right? Is that true?
Yes.
Yes.
And I'm asking Anna though, I wanna understand it because she's
Yes.
doing this.
Can I
know, I
just,
don't understand at all.
can I just make,
And please don't answer
like,
for
if you
Anna.
look at the budget report, if you have the June report with you, if you go to that department, you know, it shows where we made, it shows where pluses and minuses were made, so for
Is it this
example,
one you're on?
is that the June 30th one, Lisa?
I'm
No,
looking
it's
at-
August 4th. You
No,
want
no,
last?
no,
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 the-
look at the as of date.
Oh, I'm sorry, no,
Does it say-
7/31.
So you gotta go to the one prior.
Yep, okay, I got the one prior.
Okay, so if you go to page 9,
Yep,
just to show you, that's Department 114, and if you look, the first column shows budgeted, and the second column shows transfers. So if you look in the first account, FICA Medicare,
Mhm.
well, we ended up having to make a transfer of $1,453 dollars during the year in that account. So it shows as a plus. So if you look at like the life insurance, it shows $548.62 minus. So that's like a measure, if you will, for you to identify where we made pluses and minuses.
so the 548 with the negative.
Work on addressing, you know, what your concerns and your questions are.
My concern is that this is a ruse. Like, why are we even required to do this if it's already been done? I don't like to waste
What's the
time.
value added?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's,
Wouldn't the auditor require it to
Well,
know
it's-
that there was some action by the finance?
transactions and not 120. I think the process needs to change where we do need to approve it before it actually happens.
That might not be possible, though.
And
I know
then
I'm
it's
not
more
supposed to
timely.
interrupt, but
It is, because what
doesn't
budget
get
would be
paid, a
over
medical bill
budget and
doesn't get
another one
paid,
would
an
be
insurance
under.
payment doesn't get made.
Well, you
I
know,
mean, if you have to pay a
technically,
bill, you have to pay a bill. If it shows that it's over budget, let's see that it's over budget. Let's not, that's the whole problem with transparency. If we can't see that, then we don't know if it's being managed properly. That is our,
Doable, do you think?
well, well, before we pay a bill, approve the transfers before that occurs. That's why we do the process this way and do them as
but we're not
ratified.
approving it anyway. Do you understand what I'm saying? Let's get the timing to where it makes sense, right? We're not approving it anyway. We're waiting till the end of the year to approve things that have already happened 7 months ago.
Well,
I
I
think that's
understand that,
standard.
but, so I just want to be clear, all the transfers that happen through the end of March, we can bring them before the boards in April. And, you know what I mean? So it'll be like, they'll have occurred in March, and we'll bring them before the boards in April.
And if they occur in April, you can bring them in May?
Correct, yeah,
Right.
that's how,
At
we'll
least,
get on, move to be on a schedule
A
like
monthly.
that. That's, you know, that's certainly reasonable.
So my question is, though, kind of back to what Camille was saying in the beginning, it feels awfully convenient. I don't know. I'm just trying to understand it. If we move 15,000 out of one into another, does the other line item really need 15,000? I mean,
that is my
Or they
exact
wouldn't
can't we
question.
take,
transferring it.
let me finish my question. Can we take the money, if we need it somewhere else, is it possible that, you know, we could just take the money and say, well, we didn't use it here? We could turn it back to the town, or keep track of it somehow, because it feels like, for me, if I'm looking at the from account, we moved 10,000 out of fleet fuel into streetlights. Well, how did we happen to have, I'm just trying to understand it.
Well, okay, so we always have to realize that every year when we build our budget, at a specific point in time, we're making our best efforts to
Right.
estimate what it's gonna cost us. I mean, when, you know, when you think about it, you know, some 6 to 9 months later, or
I understand that.
for those goods and services, and for whatever reason, you know, our estimates are sometimes higher than they need to be and other
Mhm.
times lower. And so, as we're going through the budget year and we develop issues, then we have to, you know, the first place we go is within the departmental budget.
Yep.
And say, okay, let's look at my accounts, at the accounts, and do an analysis of what's been expended today, and what we estimate we're gonna need through the end of the year, and identify funds that we need to make up in the areas where we have shortfalls. Like, for example, last fiscal year, for the defined benefit annual required contribution, you know, my estimates were off. The prior year was when, you know, like, the investments go up and down, and so it threw the estimate off that I had in the budget last year. And so it's our policy, our practice, to make the annual required contribution as per the actuarial evaluation. And so I did that analysis within the department and identified, you know, the best place, you know, to take the
Right.
funds
I
from.
can see that.
So, I mean, that's how, you know, it's done throughout the budget.
I understand that. I totally get that. You don't, isn't that what an estimate is? You're not gonna know. I guess what I'm saying is, if there's one budget that's over, or one line item that's over in a budget, let's say it's really over by some reason, we transferred a student out, that was Board of Ed, but take it a similar kind of situation. What do we do with the leftover money?
Okay, so that's what I was talking about before. That becomes your operating results and goes into you
Next
know,
year's
that,
budget.
that fund balance equation.
So it does. So you do go through and scrape out all the extras, if you will, right?
That's why
Right.
you have that
And it goes
surplus
into
fund.
the fund balance.
Correct.
At the end of the year.
Correct.
Okay. I'm just trying to, even though I've done this for several years, there's so many moving parts and pieces. I'm really just trying to understand it better.
Okay.
But here's my question, and yeah, just one more time. I'm not convinced that we absolutely needed everything that funds were being transferred to. I'm thinking that more money
Yeah.
should have been returned to the fund. If we were able to save money from training and payroll,
Mm-hmm.
do we absolutely need to buy more training supplies?
Is that police? That was the police
Yeah.
transfer? Okay, so in the police department, they were putting everything for training in one account, and it was a payroll account. So every time they used something that was used that account for something that was non-payroll, the way, you know, the accounting system was set up, it would end up charging the payroll account. So at the end of the month, when we do our bank reconciliations, you know, that's how you find it, and you have to reclass the cash. Well, that's like unnecessary work. So in a subsequent budget, we made a change to have two accounts, one for payroll and one for the, you know, the more operating expenses. So, you know, this was like something new, and the estimates were incorrect. So that's why we took it from one training account and put it, you know, that made the most logical sense. And that's kind of how that transfer was rationalized.
I guess I'm wondering though, if you move it out of one, does the other account always need it, or is there any surplus?
At
How
the
do you-
point in time that we're doing the transfers, like to an account,
Yeah.
it's because we've determined that there's, you know, a true and valid need.
The left column drives the right
Because you
column.
wouldn't
Yeah.
just want to do that for the heck of it and then come
Absolutely
in front
not.
of us and say, wow, why are you doing that?
Right, no.
And in no way are you increasing the budget or modifying the original budget of the total budget. It's
There's
the same
no-
number.
All right,
All
so
we're
just
doing
go
is
ahead,
trying to
Bill.
provide
So the original
incentives.
question was whether or not we're
Safer
gonna go act
rainy
on
day.
this tonight or not.
But it goes into the
So
rainy
we at
day
a point
fund
where we can
regardless.
decide that we are gonna table it, or?
I mean, there's
I'm
nothing.
ready to vote. I'm gonna make a motion. I can do that, right? And you can vote it down. And then you can explain to the auditor. Yeah, unless with more discussion.
Well, you can make your motion, second it, and I'll ask if there's further discussion.
Yeah, I wasn't sure. I make a motion to ratify departmental transfers in the amount of $120,867.94 processed for the fiscal year that ended on June 30th, 2017.
I'll second it.
Any more discussion?
So I think this is, although it's painful, I think it's been a fruitful discussion. Thank you for taking the time to explain some stuff to me personally, for myself. I would be grateful if in the future we could modify the timing of the transfers as we discussed to make it a little more understandable as we go, because I sort of feel like this is
Last
moot.
minute.
I
It's
mean,
moot.
See, and my thought process was to bring ratifying the transfers before you, it's like not have to burden the boards with it on a monthly basis.
Yeah.
So, but, I mean, I also understand where you're coming from, so,
Yeah.
I mean, we can do it monthly, or perhaps maybe do it quarterly. I mean, what's your thought?
I would like to see it every month. If you're doing it every month, let's address it every month.
It's
Because
fresher.
I don't want to lose the transparency of what's going on. It's our job to ensure that the books are very transparent, financial transactions that are occurring are transparent, and I don't see how we can do that if we bunch it up and rush through it and don't address it properly. And I don't care, I'm sorry, if it's $2 or $200,000, it's our responsibility to question everything and do the best job we can for the taxpayers. And I think that would help me to feel like I'm doing the best job that I can.
And for me, I think it's the wrong word saying that it lacks transparency because it's right here in front of us. I think the better word is contemporaneous. Why it's happening, that it's brought to the attention of the Board of Finance when the transfer is being contemplated or made that same month.
So that's different than saying we're not being transparent.
So it was transparent to you why we were transferring more money out of a budget than what we actually had in it?
I didn't look at it as being transferred out of a budget. I looked at it as they estimated their pencil line too high, and
All right.
no, because that's where it came from. It was a lot of it was interdepartmental budgets. I'm sure Dominion, I'm sure the Connection, I'm sure anywhere we work, that all the end of the year transfers and the things that we have to do to make the budget, and my pencil line has a lot of money in it, and suddenly I'm short on my employment line. I am gonna pay my wages that are due and not.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep. And they don't have an oversight committee. We are the oversight committee.
Yes, they do have an oversight committee.
One of the things that we
Yep.
don't agree with as a board is the level of detail that we need to be involved in. And I think if we poll the board, there's a discrepancy in the level of detail that we need. And I think we as a board should address that before we set policy about what information we need at the meeting.
So I think that if you're, I think that's a good idea. I would definitely suggest that the amount of transfers that are happening here are significant. When you look at the sum total, it's well over $100,000. That to me is significant. Maybe if it came down to a monthly basis and we're just talking about 20 or 30 bucks, yeah, we're not gonna spend more than like 5 seconds on it. But when you bring this in front of me and you're asking me to make a judgment on over $100,000, that is not insignificant.
That wasn't my point. My point was that I don't think as a board, we agree on the level of
scrutiny or
on the level of detail that we need
micromanagement
to
of a
manage.
budget.
It's clear to me that when I read the How to Be a Board Member manual, that we are responsible, ultimately responsible for every aspect of the budget. That's clear. How we do that, I don't think we agree on as a board.
All right, that's fair. That is fair.
Yeah, that's true.
Fair and true. Yes, thank you. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. Now I've lost my agenda. Do you have that handy?
Right here.
That's the point.
Okay, I will make a motion to, thank you, defer the last 3 items.
Just as quick as you can make that motion, I can tell you that the purchasing policy, we brought Anna in this week, and she gave us some better education on how the town actually does its purchasing, and we've got some sharper direction on how we're gonna do what we're gonna do.
That's great.
Very good. And I would love to hear more details about that at our next meeting, so we will leave that on. The Board of Ed permanent maintenance account, what I heard is that Jeff would like to set up a subcommittee. Do I have any volunteers to take that on?
I shouldn't. I shouldn't, because I'm getting off, so it should be the people that are gonna be continuing on or are running.
Yeah, we don't even know who that is, actually, so maybe
No.
this is deferred until November.
No, I think,
Okay, I'll do it, just so we can move on to E.
Yeah.
I'll do it.
I'll come with you.
Lisa and Bill.
All right.
All
Oh,
right.
Bill, you want to do it?
Yeah. What's the next one?
Okay, Bill and
We'll
Lisa.
leave town wages on there, no action this month. Unless, do you have anything to report to us on that, Anna? Of the wage
Not-
study
okay.
issue? Thanks.
Okay. Oh, that's Bill's copy.
So you're taking notes on my.
Right, okay, that's okay, just go ahead.
All right.
There's no public here.
There was one thing I wanted to say about that. So Beth, well, then quickly, if I could have 2 minutes on study other town wages and benefits. Beth said last month she would like a committee formed on that. And then I would suggest perhaps that's something to be considered after the November election.
All right,
How is
we
that?
get started now. I mean, we already have some information. I don't mind looking at it.
I think we gotta close this purchasing policy subcommittee so that we can
think
have
that's a
more.
great
Free up more
subcommittees,
people.
Cause right now, we're good with this, we gotta
Yeah.
get that
It-
purchasing done, cause we've been kinda milking the cow for a while, and we gotta just,
Okay.
And I'm actually
up what we
reserving
talked
myself
about.
for
Well,
policies and procedures.
what?
We're on a roll right now.
Well, we've been redirected by somebody that knows what we're talking about.
Yes. That's what I mean.
All right, so we'll cover those in more detail at our next meeting. There's nobody here for a public discussion.
But maybe, Ann, if you could email me the wage study information that we did have, and I can start doing some research on the side and just,
She gave it all to us a couple
I
months
know.
ago.
But I know she did, but I'm
Okay.
asking for it again emailed.
Okay. All right.
You're gonna sit here and suffer.
No
I'm
public,
not that organized.
no public discussion. Are there any final board comments?
Nope.
Yeah, no.
Okay, hearing none, do I have a motion to adjourn?
I have.
So moved.
Second. All those in favor? Aye.